A young boy was reincarnated into a fantasy world known as Asfial, a realm brimming with wonders beyond imagination. In this magical land, dragons soared through the skies, adventurers clashed in epic battles, and spells were cast like scenes from a fairy tale. It was everything the boy had ever dreamed of as a child. His new life in this extraordinary world had just begun, or so he believed. Despite the enchanting sights, Asfiel lacked the comforts he had once taken for granted. There were no baths, no proper meals, and certainly no electricity. The civilization resembled something out of the medieval age, far removed from the convenience of the modern world he had left behind. As he lay in bed, disappointment settled in. What he once thought was paradise began to feel like a downgrade. Bro got Isekai'd and realized too late it didn't come with plumbing. He turned his eyes toward the glowing moon outside his window, longing for the freedom to move between worlds at will. In that moment, a portal materialized before him, swirling with mysterious energy. The boy stared in awe, sensing the awakening of a power deep within him. It was the Moon Gate. Dimensional travel, his unique ability. With it, he could traverse countless worlds, each with its own rules and wonders. He journeyed through lands dominated by dinosaurs, others ruled by futuristic machines, and realms beyond human understanding. Eventually, he found himself standing in a place that felt familiar: Japan. He was now a young man, and it had been over a decade since he'd seen it. He never imagined he'd return. Just then, an old man noticed him and approached, curious about the stranger's presence. Caught off guard, the young man struggled to explain himself. Instead, the man extended an offer of lunch. During the meal, the young man found himself overwhelmed with emotion. It had been years since he'd last tasted soba, and the simple dish moved him to tears. It was then that the man made an observation. The young man, though clearly not Japanese, spoke with a perfect accent. Confused, the boy looked into a nearby mirror and was met with a reflection that was no longer his own. Golden hair, green eyes, a face foreign to the one he remembered. Somewhere along the way, his appearance had changed, yet his speech remained fluent. He suspected this was another effect of his skill. From that point forward, the boy began to travel frequently between worlds. One discovery stood out: no living being besides him could pass through the Moon Gate. However, non-living objects could. That realization opened a door to possibilities far beyond mere exploration. He saw opportunity in the differences between the two worlds. In Japan, a gold nugget could buy a mansion. In Asfiel, it barely amounted to a month's wage. On the flip side, spices and sweets held immense value in Asfiel. A single luxurious cake could fetch the price of a house. With that in mind, the young man began to envision a new purpose, not as an adventurer, but as a merchant between worlds. He would bring goods from Japan into Asfiel, and in doing so, create a fortune. Life in Asfiel may have lacked convenience, but with the right strategy, he could afford every comfort he desired, even a trip to a proper bathhouse. One day, an old woman approached the young man and thanked him for his help, noting how much the elderly villagers appreciated his kindness. As a token of gratitude, she handed him some money. He accepted it with genuine appreciation, even cheerfully declaring that he would spend it all on sweets. The woman was amused and surprised, asking if he truly loved sweets that much. The young man proudly confirmed it before politely excusing himself. Of course, he couldn't admit that he planned to resell the money's value in another world, so he said nothing more. Now it was time to begin his journey as a merchant. Later, the young man, whose name was Alan, returned to Asfiel. He handed a piece of chocolate to a local merchant named Albert. Curious, Albert asked where Alan had gotten such a treat, but Alan remained vague and instead asked whether nobles might be interested in buying it. Albert responded that nobles would absolutely be drawn to it, and many would be captivated by such a luxurious sweet. It was clear Alan sought Albert's assistance, and though Albert admitted he had no direct ties to the nobility, he suggested that he might be able to connect Alan to someone who did. Still, something seemed to trouble Albert. Alan noticed and asked if there was a problem. Specifically, if selling to nobles might be an issue. Albert explained the risks. Going directly to nobles could draw all kinds of unwanted attention. Other merchants might not take kindly to someone bypassing the usual networks. In noble society, sweets weren't just treats. They were symbols of power, gifts in political dealings, and signs of wealth. As a result, merchants often organized themselves, managing farmers and confectioners collectively. Violating these unspoken agreements could invite backlash. But Alan, not seeing the big picture, merely commented that Albert's shop was small because of his fear of those said merchants. The remark irked Albert, although he conceded that Alan wasn't entirely wrong. A small-time merchant like himself could never stand toe-to-toe with those serving the elite. Albert's really out here fearing the dessert cartel. Albert eventually told Alan that he would have to find another merchant if he wanted to sell chocolates. Though slightly disappointed, Alan respected the decision. But he wasn't giving up entirely, just shifting gears. He already had another product in mind. Albert, on the other hand, was taken aback by Alan's relentless enthusiasm for sales. Alan clarified that he merely wanted Albert's professional opinion. Before they could continue, two mothers walked into the shop, delighted to see them. Alan greeted them casually and asked if they were out shopping. One of the mothers expressed surprise at seeing him there and quickly took interest in the item he was holding, asking what it was. Alan simply said it was an exotic sweet he had come across. The girl then asked if he intended to become a merchant, to which he replied that he was merely curious about the trade. Albert, realizing this was an ideal moment to test the product's appeal, encouraged Alan to let the mothers try the sweets. Alan hesitated, worried about giving away too much, but Albert didn't seem concerned. A lack of caution that in Alan's mind explained why Albert's shop had remained small. Alan handed the sweets to the mothers, who accepted them eagerly. As expected, they found them delicious and immediately wanted to buy more. Before leaving, they promised to spread the word, which left Alan feeling both excited and mildly pressured. Turning back to Albert, Alan looked apologetic for promoting his product inside someone else's store. But Albert was unimpressed. He told Alan rather bluntly to take his business elsewhere. At that moment, Alan realized that every last one of his products had been sold. Albert considered it a decent result, but Alan paid it little mind, believing the success was thanks to the mothers who helped out. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that if only the chocolates had sold instead, he might have been sitting on a small fortune by now. The potential value gnawed at him, a sharp reminder of what could have been. Albert, grounded as ever, mentally warned against underestimating the trade. Alan, recognizing the support he'd received, offered his thanks before departing. He then left behind the unsold chocolates as a token of appreciation. Though Albert tried to stop him, Alan continued on his way, leaving Albert thinking that perhaps the young man had more potential at this field than he initially thought. Later that day, Alan made his way to a bathhouse. The warm water was a rare comfort, a momentary escape from the uncertainties that weighed on him. Without a registered identity in Asfiel, his options remained limited. He couldn't rent a place to stay, hold a stable job, or pull himself out of this cycle of poverty. Yet, even with all that hanging over him, the bath lifted his spirits. In that brief moment of relaxation, a new sense of hope emerged. Selling sweets hadn't made him wealthy, but it confirmed something vital. Japanese goods held value in this world. The challenge now was figuring out what to sell and how to navigate the unfamiliar marketplace. The merchants here operated under their own systems, bound by rules he had yet to understand. There was still much to learn. Later on, he found himself at a local pub. The alcohol served there was surprisingly good, adding to the quiet luxuries of the day. Coming right after the bathhouse visit, the drink felt well earned. But before long, the atmosphere shifted. The noise died down as silence swept across the room. A group of girls had entered, drawing everyone's attention. The sudden change in mood was undeniable. Whispers rippled through the crowd, identifying one of them as the Black Princess. Her presence in the town came as a shock to the patrons. Alan, watching from his seat, began to wonder. She was like him, a transfer who might be from Japan, someone capable of moving between worlds. So, she's the Black Princess, but is Japanese? In Asfiel, individuals with unusual origins weren't as rare as one might expect. Every town had at least one or two. Those born in this world but who retained memories from a past life were known as reincarnators. Those who appeared from another world entirely were referred to as transfers. Both types were often gifted with heightened physical or magical capabilities, and many received blessings called skills. As a result, they frequently became adventurers, researchers, or merchants dealing in magical disciplines. This was Alan's first time encountering someone else who shared his circumstances. Around him, the whispers continued. The Black Princess, despite the rumors, was far more beautiful than many expected. She was the leader of the Crimson Moon Brigade, an all-female group of adventurers. Not just eye-catching, she was known for defeating powerful monsters and earning the trust of both nobles and influential merchants. Still, to Alan, seeing her in person stirred not admiration but intimidation. Not long after, Alan stood up to ask for the bill. The owner was surprised that he was leaving so early, as it was unusual for him to stop at just one drink. Alan only smiled, explaining that something had come up. Later on, Alan made a trip back to Japan to stock up on supplies. One of his key purchases was a set of manga. At the store, he relied on the guidance of the cashier, Kida, to confirm which titles were currently trending. Alan wasn't up to date with the latest hits, but Kida, being a manga enthusiast himself, helped him choose the top title from the weekly shonen camp. Along with the manga, Alan also grabbed a women's fashion magazine. When asked about it, he claimed someone had asked him to pick it up. After paying, he promptly left the store. The truth was actually different. No one had asked him for anything. Approaching the Black Princess directly had felt too risky at the time, but he strongly suspected she was a transfer, someone like him. And unlike the others, Asfiel had little in terms of entertainment, so he hoped that these manga could serve as a bridge. The purchase was costly, especially for someone in his situation, and all he could do now was hope his gamble would pay off. Once back in Asfiel, Alan made his way to the place where he intended to deliver the manga. But things didn't go as planned. The restaurant was closed to the public due to a private event, and its windows were completely shuttered. Rumor had it the Black Princess was inside. If he missed this chance, there might not be another. Leaving could make him seem suspicious, but standing around might only worsen the impression. While he was hesitating, one of the girls from the Crimson Moon Brigade took notice. She spotted him loitering near the entrance and called him out. Seizing the opportunity, Alan explained that he had something to give to the Black Princess. He handed her the manga, stressing that it was a gift, free of charge. If it wasn't needed, she could simply discard it. Without waiting for a reaction, Alan quickly took his leave. Although confused, the girl decided to take the package inside. Within the restaurant, another member of the Crimson Moon Brigade, Kalkira, called out to the girl from outside, Aina, asking what the item was. Upon hearing that it came from some weirdo outside for the Black Princess, Kalkira inspected it carefully. After confirming that it wasn't laced with poison or equipped with any kind of dangerous magic, Aina handed it over to the Black Princess. Upon receiving the package, the Black Princess showed hesitation, unsure whether to open it. Aina, who had delivered it, offered reassurance, mentioning that the person who handed it over claimed she could discard it if she wasn't interested. With that, the Black Princess opened the package. Inside were several books. At first glance, Aina found them to be ordinary in appearance, but their presence was certainly unusual. She couldn't understand why such items were specifically addressed to their captain. Then, without warning, the Black Princess frantically asked who had given the package. In her previous life, the girl now known as the Black Princess had been running for her life, chased into the woods by a frantic mob calling her a Miko. Confusion clouded her mind, but she kept running. Moments earlier, she had simply been waiting to be picked up from school, but in an instant her surroundings warped. Without warning, she had been pulled into another world. Before she could comprehend what was happening, she was falling, plunging into an abyss. As darkness closed in, she surrendered to her fate, her final thoughts drifting to her father. But death never came. Instead, she awoke in an unfamiliar world. A couple stood by her side, relieved to see her regain consciousness. Alarmed, she questioned who they were. Noticing her unease, the woman gently apologized and explained that they were innkeepers. They had found her collapsed at the base of a cliff. The Black Princess confirmed that she indeed fell. When she asked if they had saved her, they deflected the credit, saying her survival was thanks to her own strength. Surviving such a fall was, according to them, something only a Miko could do. Still unfamiliar with the term, she asked what a Miko was. The couple explained that Mikos were divine messengers, beings from another world, marked by traits like black hair and blessed with unknown powers. Though she didn't yet understand her own abilities, the signs were there. Overwhelmed, she admitted that none of it made sense. The woman then handed her a warm cup of tea, advising her to rest first and make sense of everything later. Taking that advice to heart, she drank the tea and slowly calmed her thoughts. Once her strength returned, she expressed her gratitude and prepared to leave. The couple wished her well, and she returned the sentiment. From that moment, she began her journey, determined to find a way back to her own world. With her powers as a Miko, she managed to travel safely, never encountering danger despite being alone. But as stories of her presence spread, people began to gather around her. In time, the Crimson Moon Brigade came into being, a band that followed her loyally. Looking back, she realized how fortunate she was to have met such companions. They never asked about her purpose. They simply believed in her. She also hoped that one day she could tell them everything. In the present, the Black Princess visited the pub where Alan had been. She approached him, asking if he was the one who had sent the mysterious package. Alan greeted her with a smile and asked Zian, the pub's owner, to serve her a drink. As the pub neared closing time, Zian reminded Alan to lock up before leaving. They sat with one seat between them, the silence heavy. Alan broke it, admitting the awkwardness but explaining that this conversation was best kept private, something only shared between kindred souls. He asked if she was Japanese and she confirmed it, revealing that she was a reincarnator. When Alan asked her name, she introduced herself as Shizuku Sayoji, who was turning 18 that year. She then asked for his name, and Alan responded with a light introduction of his own, saying he was just a 20-year-old without a job. Shizuku asked for Alan's name from his original world, to which he replied that it was Masato Shinjo, a regular man who had been 25 when he died. Though she apologized for asking something so personal, Alan reassured her that it was fine. Shizuku then noticed something odd. Alan hadn't reacted to the name Sayoji. This suggested that the other transfers he had met might have been from a different time entirely. When Alan asked if she had been famous or perhaps even an idol, Shizuku realized he truly had no clue about her former life. Alan went on to speculate that they may have come from different timelines. Based on his own estimate, 20 years had passed since his death. Yet the Japanese base, with its distinctly Showa-era aesthetic, didn't quite reflect that passage of time. In that moment, Shizuku's interest spiked. She wanted to know more about his ability to return to Japan. She tried to press for details, but Alan quickly shut down the idea. According to him, bringing another living person across worlds was impossible. However, he could transfer objects and even deliver goods directly to her. He tried to lighten the mood by suggesting it wasn't such a bad arrangement. Shizuku didn't respond, her thoughts heavy, until Alan insisted she have another drink. With no bartender around, Alan brought out a bottle of tea from Japan. Though unsure if she would enjoy it, Shizuku accepted and took a sip. When Alan asked for her opinion, she smiled and told him it was delicious. Watching her, Alan was momentarily struck by how mature she seemed, and it was hard to believe she was only 18. Sensing her vulnerability, Shizuku apologized for showing such a raw side of herself. Alan assured her it was nothing to be ashamed of, admitting that he himself had once cried over eating soba after reincarnating. Shizuku, unfamiliar with the dish, piqued Alan's curiosity. He promised to bring some for her the next time he returned to Japan. Though she still hoped for a clue that could help her find her way home, this small comfort was a welcome consolation. Just then, Shizuku offered to sponsor Alan. In return, she requested that he procure specific items for her. Alan was caught off guard but agreed, warning her not to go overboard since he lacked both a stable income and legal identity in this world. Shizuku replied by offering to draft a letter on his behalf. She then asked if he was any good at organizing documents. The next morning, Shizuku was up early, waking the members of the Crimson Moon Brigade. She had an announcement to make. Alan would be joining them as their newest member. Alan really walked into a guild and accidentally joined a girl group. The revelation sparked an immediate reaction. Aina, startled, recognized him as the weird man from the other day and questioned if Shizuku was truly serious. However, Shizuku affirmed her decision, stating plainly that she trusted him. Alan, meanwhile, lingered cautiously at the doorway, fully expecting a reception like this. As the room processed the news, one of the girls stepped forward to question Shizuku again, voicing concern over Alan being a man. Shizuku clarified that Alan wouldn't be accompanying them on the field. Instead, he'd be working behind the scenes assigned to logistics. Without missing a beat, she appointed Aina as Alan's trainer, an announcement that immediately drew protest from the reluctant girl. Later that day, the two met for the so-called training session. Aina, clearly still uneasy, broke the silence with a question. She asked how Alan managed to earn the captain's interest, noting she had never seen Shizuku that enthusiastic before. Alan admitted it took some effort, but in the end it worked out, even if he hadn't expected to join the brigade himself. Meanwhile, Aina couldn't help but reflect on how unusual the situation was. In all their history, never had a man joined the Crimson Moon Brigade. Aina quickly pushed aside her earlier doubts, remarking that the extra manpower would be helpful regardless. Alan then asked if she'd really been handling all the brigade's logistics on her own, and she confirmed it, explaining that she and Shizuku were the only ones capable of reading and doing basic math. The weight of the task began to settle in on Alan, knowing that managing supplies for over 30 people was no small feat. Aina then laid out the plan. She would take care of stock checks while Alan would be in charge of restocking. She also mentioned that the Crimson Moon Brigade's name alone should be enough to keep merchants from charging him unfairly. Before he set out, Alan reminded her not to overwork herself. Later that day, Alan began his errands, still in disbelief over how everything had turned out. Originally, the plan was to become a merchant connected to the Crimson Moon Brigade, someone who could trade freely with nobles. Instead, he had ended up as one of their own. Now that he was part of the team, he knew he had to prove himself if he wanted to earn the trust of the other members. As he passed by Albert's shop, a group of familiar mothers called out to him, waving him over. They wasted no time confirming the rumor of whether he really joined the Crimson Moon Brigade. Alan was taken aback that the news had already reached them. The mothers laughed, explaining that gossip travels fast, and then teasingly asked if there was something going on between him and the Black Princess. Flustered, Alan quickly denied it, saying she had only been interested in the goods he sold. He was just an added bonus. Still, the speed of the rumors left him uneasy. One of the mothers mentioned how much she had enjoyed the sweets he brought last time, while another offered her congratulations and wished him luck in his new role. Alan responded with a sheepish laugh, saying he was only running errands for now. Then one of the mothers told him to visit her shop more often, promising him a discount. Shocked by the generous offer, Alan asked if she was really serious. After picking up some of the supplies, he realized just how much he owed these women and quietly noted that he couldn't thank them enough. That's when he heard someone shouting his name from the crowd. Turning around, he found himself surrounded by a small group of people, all excited to see him. Word had clearly spread fast, and now several townsfolk were offering their support and even supplies. The unexpected outpouring of kindness overwhelmed him. Caught in the emotion of it all, Alan couldn't hold it in any longer and let out a joyful scream. Later that day, Aina thanked Alan for his help and asked if he had finished his shopping run. Alan confirmed that he had and handed over the invoices, though he kept himself half hidden around the corner. Curious, Ina asked why he was acting so suspicious, so Alan explained that he was just being cautious. When Ina scanned the invoice, her expression changed instantly. Alarmed, Alan asked if he had gone over budget, but Ina quickly clarified that it was the opposite. The total cost was 20% lower than usual. Suspicious of the unusually low price, she questioned if Alan had done anything shady. Alan firmly denied it, explaining that he simply received goodwill discounts from a few acquaintances. He even told her to check with the merchants herself if she had any doubts. Hearing this, Ina relaxed and said there was no need to interrogate anyone. As she made her way to the door, she turned back with a smile, telling Alan he had done a good job. Later on, Alan returned to Japan, carrying with him a letter from Shizuku. As he looked at it, he couldn't help but wonder if it would truly make a difference. The Crimson Moon Brigade finally arrived at the royal capital, with Alan traveling alongside them. Shizuku acknowledged the group's hard work throughout their long journey and informed them that Lineberg would now serve as their new base of operations. Their team house had already been arranged, and everyone was instructed to find their assigned rooms and settle in. As the group dispersed, Shizuku pulled Alan aside. She asked him to return to Japan once he had completed his current responsibilities. Alan didn't mind, but asked if she needed something in particular. Shizuku replied vaguely, saying she didn't need any supplies this time and that Alan would understand once he got there. She didn't elaborate, turning away without offering further explanation. Before fully leaving, though, she reminded him to pick up the next volume of Dream Love, a manga she clearly adored. Later, Alan arrived in Japan, only to find the village in a state of commotion. The old man he had once met, Genji, greeted him warmly, commenting on how long it had been. Curious, Alan asked about the gathering, and Genji explained that the people were from the Saioji group. Apparently, they had been searching for Alan for over a week, much to Genji's confusion, especially since Alan had never heard of them before. Seeing no point in hiding, Alan decided to approach the group. As he neared, he spotted a car and a young woman seated inside. She asked if he was Alan, and once he confirmed it, she invited him into the car, noting how hot it was outside. Inside the vehicle, the unfamiliar woman casually commented on the difficulty of finding him. She also complained about the lack of decent cigarettes in the area. Alan offered an apology but quickly realized he didn't even know her name. She introduced herself as Akira Kamiki, telling him to call her Akira. When Alan asked if her search had something to do with Shizuku's letter, Akira suddenly slammed the car door shut. Her demeanor shifted and it became clear that Alan's response had confirmed her suspicions. Without hesitation, Akira radioed her team announcing that the target had been secured and requesting backup. As tension filled the air, she warned Alan to cooperate if he wanted to remain unharmed. Her piercing gaze and chilling words made it clear she wasn't bluffing. Forced into submission, Alan had no choice but to go along with whatever was about to unfold. During the ride, he asked what the Saioji group actually was. Akira explained that it was a sprawling corporate empire, deeply rooted in real estate and other crucial industries both in Japan and abroad. It functioned like a powerful zaibatsu, and its origins could be traced back to one of Kyoto's wealthiest families. Under the leadership of Ryugen Saioji, Shizuku's father, it had grown into a major conglomerate. Akira also revealed that her family, the Kamikis, had served the Saiyojis for generations. She herself had been by Shizuku's side since middle school. But 3 years ago, coinciding with the start of her full-time position at the estate, she began to notice that something wasn't right. There was a time when Akira served tea to Shizuku and the girl complimented her for it. Akira responded with the usual courtesy, but Shizuku reminded her not to be so formal when it was just the two of them. Just then, Shizuku casually brought up the Dream Love anime and asked if Akira had recorded the latest episode, to which she said yes. Shizuku then wondered if Akira planned to stay the night, suggesting they watch it together. Amused, Akira agreed to the idea without protest. But then, everything changed. One day, as Akira waited for Shizuku to return home, she was met with the devastating news that Shizuku had gone missing. It was abrupt and baffling. Akira demanded answers, questioning the guards and how such a disappearance could happen under their watch. Denial clouded her thoughts, convinced it had to be a mistake. Yet when they checked the surveillance systems, nothing unusual was found. Shizuku had vanished without a trace. Even now, the search continued. Specialist teams had been dispatched globally, yet every trail led to a dead end. With no leads and no breakthroughs, Akira turned to Alan, hoping he held the answers. They eventually reached their destination. Akira stepped out of the vehicle, offering an apology for the deception earlier, then urged Alan to get straight to the point. As they entered the massive structure looming before them, Alan was stunned. He hadn't imagined that such a facility existed near the quiet Akane village. Soon after, Akira knocked on a grand office door and announced their arrival before the chairman. Inside, Ryugen Saioji, the head of the Saioji family, greeted Alan. recognizing him from the contents of a letter his daughter had once written. Alan was immediately overwhelmed by the man's sheer presence, wondering if all men of such status exuded the same aura. Ryugen, however, quickly reassured him that he knew Alan wasn't responsible for Shizuku's disappearance. The letter, written in a unique cipher only known within the family, was proof that both the sender and its message were authentic. It meant that Shizuku was still alive and that she trusted Alan. Curious, Alan asked how they had tracked him down despite his lack of a permanent address or employment. Ryugen explained that the postmark on the letter had helped narrow their search, and the letter itself contained a detailed description of Alan. He then expressed admiration for him. Just as Akira had mentioned, Shizuku had vanished 3 years ago even while surrounded by dozens of guards. The circumstances were impossible to make sense of. But then the letter came, stating that she had found an ally and needed support. Now, Ryugen needed to hear everything Alan knew. Before continuing, Alan asked if the room had any surveillance systems in place. Ryugen assured him it didn't, and that the room was tightly secured, with even the windows fitted with one-way mirrors. Then, Alan decided to show him the truth instead. As he activated his power, Akira instinctively aimed her gun at him, but Ryugen quickly ordered all weapons lowered. Before them, a portal appeared, a moon gate, summoned by Alan's abilities. He explained that the gate was a link to another world and that Shizuku was on the other side. Ryugen was stunned. He asked about the conditions required to use the gate. Alan admitted that he didn't have all the answers, but what he did know was this. Aside from himself, only non-living things could pass through it. Ryugen, still skeptical yet intrigued, asked if he could touch the moon gate. With Alan's permission, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the glowing portal. He questioned if his daughter was truly on the other side. Alan confirmed it without hesitation, revealing that Shizuku now lived in a fantasy realm, leading a group of adventurers. It was a claim too fantastical for Ryugen to accept at face value, but the very existence of the moon gate left little room for denial. Akira, still cautious, questioned Ryugen's belief in Alan's story. Ryugen admitted that he remained doubtful because it all sounded like something out of a fairy tale. Still, he had a simple request. He handed Alan a smartphone and asked him to take a photo of Shizuku as proof. Though unfamiliar with the sleek modern device, Alan accepted the task. Ryugen assured him that Akira would handle the instructions. Meanwhile, Alan was in awe of the device because it looked far from the flip phones he once knew. Ryugen then made it clear that he still questioned Alan's intentions, uncertain how much truth or deception lay in his words. But the letter was real, written in a family cipher only they understood. Alan's delivery of it couldn't be ignored. With that, Ryugen extended a hand in gratitude, asking him to pass along his regards to Shizuku. Alan accepted the gesture, silently agreeing to the terms. Soon after, Alan returned to the fantasy realm of Asfiel and reunited with Shizuku. As she quietly sipped her tea, he informed her of his recent encounter with her father. He hadn't expected Ryugen to show up personally, much less with an entire entourage arriving in the rural village where Alan resided. Frustration bubbled up as he felt the whole situation had been excessive. But Shizuku calmly reminded him that at the time, she was the sole heir to the family. Alan dropped the subject knowing she wasn't wrong. He then brought out the smartphone Ryugen had given him and explained its purpose, which was to serve as proof of her existence. Shizuku took the device with ease, revealing a surprising level of proficiency. As she explored the phone, she stumbled upon a video, a message prepared by Ryugen. Alan, watching from nearby, was impressed by the clarity of the footage, almost as if it were in ultra-high definition. Shizuku, however, was visibly moved. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched the screen, and Alan, realizing the intimacy of the moment, felt a hint of guilt for observing. Before she could hand the phone back, Shizuku noticed Alan had vanished. She found him downstairs, casually interacting with the other girls. He explained that it was a good time to introduce them to the smartphone, and with Shizuku's permission, the group quickly became excited. They insisted on taking a photo together, even pulling Shizuku into the impromptu gathering. Though caught off guard, she agreed. Alan gathered everyone and snapped the photo, capturing a rare moment of unity. Afterward, Aina approached Alan. She commented on how he seemed to be settling into life with the brigade. Alan wasn't so sure, as he still hadn't formed strong bonds with everyone. Aina reassured him that there was no rush, especially since adjusting to the new base took time. She then brought up the Royal Capital Street Festival, piquing his interest. She explained that the event was held every weekend in the capital, drawing merchants from across the land. The festival featured a wide range of goods, from everyday trinkets to luxurious items meant for nobles. Since the brigade wasn't set to resume their adventuring anytime soon, Aina encouraged him to pay it a visit. That's when Alan asked whether he would be allowed to set up a stall of his own. Alan had successfully secured an application for the street festival, but one problem remained. He had no idea what to sell. His thoughts were soon interrupted by the arrival of Camille, Luca, and Lazuli, members of the Crimson Moon Brigade. Camille greeted him with her usual cheer, immediately questioning what he was up to. When Alan mentioned he'd be heading out, Camille jumped to conclusions, teasing that he might be running away. Caught off guard, Alan admitted that part of him thought staying might just make things awkward for everyone. However, the girls quickly shut that idea down. None of them held any resentment toward him anymore. Lazuli in particular took a moment to apologize for how things started, explaining that their initial hostility came from past experiences with men. Luca chimed in, noting that they were actually thankful for Alan's presence, especially because their captain seemed lighter and more at ease since he had arrived. Lazuli went on to say that anyone who could contribute to the brigade was welcome. Camille agreed, mentioning that even Aina liked him. She then mentioned that he saw him more as a father figure. That claim sparked a mini debate, as the others argued that Alan felt more like a brother than anything else. Listening to their playful banter, Alan felt reassured that finally he was beginning to feel accepted. Lazuli soon redirected the conversation back to his earlier task, asking what he was working on. Alan explained that he was filling out paperwork for the upcoming festival, planning to set up a small stall. The girls were surprised, curious about what he'd be selling. Alan confessed he hadn't decided yet. His current idea involved sweets targeted toward nobles. Still, he struggled to come up with more options. The girls quickly dove into brainstorming mode. Lazuli darted to the bookshelf and returned with one of Shizuku's favorite manga volumes. She excitedly suggested selling the books at the festival. The others lit up at the idea, thrilled by the prospect of having access to more volumes if Alan bought a batch. Meanwhile, Alan was skeptical. It seemed like Lazuli's suggestion came from a place of self-interest more than business savvy. He was also caught off guard by the fact that the girls could read Japanese. Still, he had to admit that entertainment goods could work. It might not be the most cost-effective option, though. Though disappointed by the logistical concerns, the girls perked up again when Alan said he'd stock at least a few copies. That was all they needed to hear. With that settled, they eagerly promised to stop by his stall once the festival began. Later on, Alan made his way to Japan to return the smartphone to Ryugen. Yet even as he approached the task, he wasn't entirely sure if Ryugen had believed the contents he'd submitted. His uncertainty was briefly interrupted when Akira greeted him at the door, announcing that she would be acting as his assistant. Her unusually cheerful demeanor threw him off so much that he shut the door in her face. Afterward, Alan apologized, explaining that he'd simply been startled. He asked her to speak with him as she used to, but she declined. Still, her calm expression was enough to reassure him. Alan then mentioned that it seemed the chairman had accepted the proof he presented. Akira confirmed that Ryugen had been genuinely thrilled. Alongside the photo, the glowing mineral Alan had delivered, luminite, was confirmed to be a completely unknown substance. There was no longer any reason to doubt his story. Without delay, Akira handed him a set of documents and cards, stating that this was the promised support. Among the items were identity and residency papers, details about his assigned living space, which came fully furnished with a PC and other essentials, and a black credit card with no spending limit. She then showed him the balance in his new account, over 100 million yen. She really pulled out the entire Sugar Daddy starter kit. Alan was stunned. Though grateful, he couldn't help but feel that all of it was a bit too much. Akira then laid out two conditions. First, Alan would be expected to cooperate in the research surrounding the gate, as they were eager to understand his abilities and the nature of the other world. Second, and most importantly, he was to provide full support to Shizuku. As she emphasized the second condition, her expression turned sharp and unyielding, leaving Alan no choice but to agree. From that point forward, Akira informed him that she would oversee his security and assist him however necessary. Alan thanked her, then made a request of his own. Not long after, the two ventured into the city to search for entertainment goods. Though Alan could have made the selections himself, he admitted he was out of touch with modern Japan. Akira understood but remained curious about his intentions for opening a shop. Alan then explained that he needed to build connections. Back home, he relied on familiar faces, but this was his first time navigating the capital. Winning over nobles would stabilize his finances and grant the brigade better access to information and resources. Akira found his reasoning puzzling, pointing out that with the resources given to him, wealth was no longer a concern. Alan acknowledged this, but he admitted he wanted to earn his own way. He wasn't content with simply receiving support, and he wanted to build something of his own. Akira found his mindset unexpectedly sincere, and Alan found comfort in that. Akira then asked Alan if he had any plans to stock some items. However, before he could respond, his attention drifted toward a nearby store display filled with trading cards. Intrigued, Alan paused while Akira looked on, puzzled by his interest in them. Alan explained that in Asfiel, entertainment was a rarity. While nobles occasionally indulged in board games, they were often simplistic and uninspired. Trading cards, with their strategy and collectability, might stand out as something new. The only issue was choosing the right ones because many of the titles were unfamiliar to him. Akira then mentioned that the C Group operated across numerous industries, and entertainment was no exception. One of their subsidiaries even specialized in trading cards. Without hesitation, she made a phone call ordering an entire warehouse's worth of crossword puzzles. Alan panicked, urging her not to go overboard. Eventually, he opted to purchase only a few cards, explaining that he wanted to test the waters before committing fully. He thanked Akira for her help and mentioned his plan to look for sweets and books next. Aware that she had her own responsibilities, he told her it was okay not to accompany him, but Akira refused. She insisted on staying by his side, explaining that if anything happened to him, it would break Shizuku's heart. Alan was caught off guard by her straightforwardness. At that moment, he decided to place his full trust in her. Later, as they browsed through more shops, Akira showed Alan a stack of CDs. He was surprised and felt outdated, especially since he'd only known DVDs. It hadn't hit him until now how much the world had changed. Then something on a nearby TV caught his eye, a character from a show he recognized. He asked if it was Dream Love, the series Shizuku adored. At that, he noticed Akira had gone silent. She admitted it made her feel nostalgic. Shizuku had once invited her to watch it together, but the moment never came. Alan, sensing he might have touched a nerve, quickly apologized. But Akira reassured him that that wasn't her intention. She might have missed spending time with Shizuku, but being by her side wasn't the only way to serve her. Akira then offered to buy the CD so Alan could give it to Shizuku as a gift. Shortly after, she suggested compiling all the entertainment, manga, dramas, and more into a single tablet. If the people of Asfiel were craving joy, offering a wide selection would be more effective than a handful of items. As Akira pondered the idea, Alan watched her quietly, smiling to himself. At that moment, she reminded him of an older sister. When Alan returned to Asfiel, the first person to greet him was Lazuli, who quickly informed him that the permit for his festival stall had finally arrived. Wasting no time, he went to check it for himself, feeling a wave of relief that everything had been approved without any issues. As he reviewed the permit, Lazuli leaned in and asked in a hushed tone about the merchandise he was planning to sell. Alan told her that the goods, specifically the manga, would be delivered on the day of the festival, since they had no place to store the shipment at the base beforehand. That answer clearly didn't sit well with Lazuli. She looked genuinely annoyed that she wouldn't be able to get her hands on the manga right away. With a sigh and a hint of bitterness, she muttered that she hoped his stall would fail, just so she could get early access to the next volume. Damn, she really chose violence. Alan found her dramatic reaction more irritating than amusing, but he didn't press the matter. Changing the subject, Alan asked when Luca and the others were expected to arrive. Lazuli said they'd be coming in the evening, though she herself would show up a bit later with Camille because she still had a few tasks to wrap up. As the conversation shifted, she casually asked where Alan's booth would be set up, noting that it seemed like he was aiming for a wealthier audience. Alan answered that he had selected booth 13, located along the West Main Street. That response took Lazuli by surprise. She pointed out that the West Main Street was no ordinary location. It was prime real estate, typically reserved for the capital's most experienced merchants. Even more notable was its close proximity to the Central District, a place known for being sealed off from the rest of the city. According to Lazuli, the Central District was home to the highest-ranking nobles in the capital. It was heavily restricted, and most commoners rarely if ever laid eyes on the people who lived there. However, there were rumors that a few eccentric nobles occasionally snuck out to experience the street festival. If Alan's booth was truly that close to the Central District, he might end up catching the attention of someone far above the usual customer base. Still, Lazuli emphasized that all of this was just speculation. Alan didn't seem fazed by this. In fact, it made Lazuli suspect he had aimed for that exact booth on purpose. Alan neither confirmed nor denied it, simply leaving it to her imagination. Lazuli suddenly burst out laughing, which caught Alan off guard. When he asked why, she brushed it off, saying he was just very interesting. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or sarcasm. Lazuli, confused by his reaction, eventually excused herself, saying she was looking forward to the festival. Once she left, Alan was left with a lingering sense of unease. But with the preparations finally complete, all that remained was to wait for the festival. Whatever would happen, he reminded himself, would happen. When the festival day finally arrived, the streets of Asfiel came alive with movement and excitement. Alan set up his booth, mentally assuring himself that all preparations were complete and that it was time to put his plans into action. Alongside the main goods, he had brought a small selection of books, though he intended to be selective about who he sold them to. His primary focus was chocolate, with trading cards included as a test. While the true crowds were expected to come in the evening, the morning already saw a decent turnout, mostly composed of upper-class individuals. The nearby booths offered high-end merchandise, but Alan believed his products could stand their ground. He was determined to make the most of the opportunity. As time passed, however, reality began to chip away at his confidence. Visitors walked by without stopping. No one seemed interested in his products. While the surrounding stalls buzzed with activity, his remained untouched. He couldn't help but question whether his products were too niche or if the problem was him. Life really gave him an expectation versus reality moment. It was then that Albert appeared, noting Alan's gloomy expression. Surprised, Alan asked what he was doing in the capital, and Albert explained that he was there for business. Upon discovering the festival, he decided to drop by, though he hadn't expected to see Alan as a merchant. With a teasing remark about Alan's booming business, it felt to Alan like Albert had shown up just to mock him. Albert denied this, and in a surprising turn, offered some advice despite their status as business rivals. He pointed out that unfamiliar goods, especially food, were a tough sell. Free samples might help, but given the clientele, most wouldn't eat them out in the open. Alan was disheartened to hear this, but he knew Albert was right. Albert continued, suggesting that Alan might have better luck targeting the middle class in future festivals, which were held every week. Though Alan accepted the advice, it clearly weighed on him. Noticing this, Albert encouraged him not to give up, reminding him that the afternoon crowd still lay ahead. In the world of business, he said, two things mattered most: quality and trust. And Alan had both. Though Albert considered himself a small-time merchant, and his words might not carry weight, Alan didn't see it that way. Although he really did believe his shop was small. Thanks for rubbing that in, bud. As Albert turned to leave, Alan thanked him for the advice. But before walking away completely, Albert paused, telling Alan that he might discover something beyond the original goal he had set for himself. The day stretched on with only a handful of customers dropping by Alan's booth. Sales were far from impressive, and Alan decided that once Luca and the others arrived, he'd close up early. While waiting, his thoughts drifted back to Albert's words. He had already begun to earn money and chase success, so the idea of finding something beyond his goal puzzled him. Suddenly, a stir swept through the crowd as a striking figure made his entrance into the festival. Judging by his regal demeanor and appearance, he was clearly no ordinary citizen. The young man was none other than the heir to the Castellano Marquesate, instantly drawing attention from everyone around. Alan watched him closely, suspecting the noble had come incognito to browse the booths in person. The rumors were true then. Nobles really did visit the festival. With that knowledge, Alan braced himself and stayed alert. Then, to his surprise, the young noble made his way to Alan's stall and inquired about the merchandise. Alan explained that he sold rare items from different regions, specializing in confections and recreational games. He showcased his chocolates, noting their strong aroma and offering the noble a sample. However, the young man's guard immediately stepped in, trying to stop the tasting. The noble, unfazed, waved off the concern, confident that he could handle any fallout. Alan, sensing the subtle tension, could tell the guards weren't pleased. Intrigued, the noble asked more about the chocolates. Alan explained the process. Cacao beans ground and mixed with sugar and vanilla, then hardened into form. To prove their safety, Alan took a piece himself and instructed the noble to hold it by the wrapper since it melted with body heat. Following Alan's advice, the noble tried the chocolate, chewing thoughtfully. His silence stretched long enough to make Alan anxious, but when he finally spoke, he called it amazing. A quick reminder from his guard not to speak with his mouth full brought a wave of relief to Alan. The noble then asked about the price. Alan responded that a box of 8 cost 30,000 gold. Hearing this, the young man seemed surprised because it was cheaper than expected. Alan explained it was a special introductory price, which the noble found acceptable. Without hesitation, he purchased the entire stock, paying more than the price given to him. He insisted on overpaying as a token of appreciation for the surprise and delight the chocolates brought him. Interested now in Alan's other offerings, the noble examined the rest of the sweets, con peto, caramel, and more, and bought them all with the same enthusiasm. Alan was nearly overwhelmed by the growing pile of gold, while the young noble seemed thrilled to have spent 1 million on sweets alone. Then, his eyes landed on the paper bags, which were the trading cards. Alan explained that each pack contained 5 random cards and that players needed to build decks of 40 to play, with instructions included in a booklet. The noble didn't hesitate. He bought the entire stock on the spot. Though stunned, Alan accepted, still processing the surreal experience. Upon opening a pack, the noble and his guards were impressed by the detailed illustrations. One guard commented on the exceptional quality of the 3,000 gold packs, while another considered buying some himself. Alan listened in disbelief. Everything he had brought was sold out in a single day. He thanked the noble for his patronage, but the boy returned the gratitude, saying the experience had opened his eyes to something new. Before leaving, he asked for Alan's name and he introduced himself humbly. The noble then placed something in Alan's palm and departed, saying he looked forward to seeing him again. Once the noble was gone, Alan looked at his hand. 2 medals. It was, without a doubt, the most unbelievable encounter of his life. Not long after, Camille and Lazuli came rushing in, apologizing for the delay. Upon seeing that everything had already been sold, Camille panicked. Lazuli, equally shocked, remarked that Alan had really pulled it off. They thought they'd arrived quickly yet had missed it all. Camille, sulking, lamented that she was hoping to get the next volume of her favorite manga. To their delight, Alan had saved a copy just for them. The girls playfully scolded him for not saying so earlier, but were already too excited to read it with the captain. Watching them, Alan laughed to himself. As they gushed over the manga, he realized that perhaps this bond was what Albert meant when he spoke of finding something beyond his goal. Later that night, while Alan was immersed in bookkeeping, Shizuku quietly approached him. She asked why he was still working so late, prompting Alan to explain that he wanted to finish organizing his records. In turn, he asked what she was doing awake at that hour, guessing that she had been reading the newest volume of the manga. But Shizuku told him she had only come for a glass of water, and decided to sit beside him to keep him company. As the night deepened, she casually brought up the Royal Capital's Market Festival and asked if anything interesting had happened. Alan, sensing she may have visited the festival herself, kept the details to share later. Out of nowhere, Alan admitted that his original goal in becoming a merchant had always been simple. He just wanted to get rich. It was never meant to be some grand mission or act of service for others. It was supposed to be his own path for his own gain. Yet, to his surprise, people kept thanking him. That reaction left him unsure of how to feel because he hadn't expected gratitude. Without saying much, Shizuku gently handed him a small box. She called it a token of her appreciation. Alan was caught off guard not just by the gift, but by the fact that Shizuku had been listening all along. When he opened the box, he found a necklace resting inside. It was a radiant gem that shimmered with the full spectrum of color like a rainbow frozen in crystal. Shizuku explained that it was a rare gemstone, something often used as a magical catalyst. Still, she admitted that the necklace alone couldn't possibly express the full extent of her gratitude. She then reminded Alan that even if his reasons were purely personal, his actions had led to something real. Because of him, she was able to reconnect with her family and with Akira. His motives didn't change the impact he had made. Alan let out a quiet laugh. Her words brought to mind something Ryugen had once said to him, and it was almost uncanny. The resemblance between the two was more than just blood, and it echoed in their thoughts. As the mood shifted, Shizuku asked him to keep looking out for her father and Akira. Alan's expression turned serious. He nodded, promising to do whatever he could. He then thanked her for the necklace, assuring her that he would treasure it and take good care of it. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Ray was still basking in the afterglow of the festival, exclaiming how amazing it had been. But before he could continue, a woman appeared behind him, calling him out for sneaking into town again. The young noble tried to brush it off with a smile, handing her a box of chocolates as a lighthearted peace offering. He promised they'd see each other again tomorrow. As he walked away, she stood still, surprised and silent, the box of chocolates resting gently in her hands. Alan flipped a medal into the air, unsure if it was called a Pramika medal. As he turned it over in his hand, Camille approached, greeting him with a casual good morning. She asked for a closer look at the medal, then questioned why he was wandering around when he had training. Alan explained that it was his break time, so he figured it was fine. As Camille examined the medal, her interest visibly piqued. Alan asked if she recognized it, and to his surprise, she did. So much so that she wondered why he didn't. She asked if it belonged to him, but before he could respond, Luca and Lazuli arrived, inviting them to join for tea. Camille lit up at the offer, while Alan couldn't help but feel a bit frustrated that the medal discussion had been cut short. Once they were seated, Camille's focus quickly shifted to the sweets on the table. Her eyes lit up as she curiously asked what kind of treats they were. Luca explained that the cookies were a gift from Alan, a small thank you for the help the girls had given him during the street festival. As they dug in, Camille pointed to a particularly odd-looking cookie and asked what animal it was meant to be. Alan blinked, surprised she couldn't tell it was a cat. Then again, in this world, cats were nothing like the ones he knew. Here they were wild and aggressive, not the soft, domestic creatures he was used to. Even so, the cookies were met with delight. The girls commented on how cute they were, almost too cute to eat, and couldn't ignore how soft and warm they felt to the touch. Alan, however, couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't quite belong. The cheerful energy around him only made his quiet awkwardness more obvious. Luca soon brought up the festival, saying she had heard it was a huge success. Alan confirmed it was, but admitted that the credit mostly went to one customer who bought everything. He explained that the medals he had were given to him by that very person, which left Camille skeptical. She insisted that couldn't be possible, but Alan stood by his story. Lazuli asked to see the medals, so Alan showed them the gold and silver Pramika medals. When he asked what they were exactly, Luca clarified that Pramika medals were used to access restricted areas. To demonstrate, she revealed her own dungeon access medal. Camille then added that Pramika medals were rare and only given to individuals recognized by the guild. They weren't easy to obtain. Lazuli was especially stunned to see a gold Pramika for the first time. Luca recalled that Camille had a silver promika, and Camille explained that hers only granted access to the school district. It allowed her to enter schools marked with the same crest as the medal. Based on Alan's medals, he had access to both the Royal Capital School District and N5 Magic Academy within it. As for the gold medal, it likely gave him entry to the Central District. Luca suggested he consult the Academy for confirmation, as someone had likely given him those medals as an invitation. With that, the puzzle pieces began falling into place for Alan. But the realization brought tension because he now had to meet Ray alone, the Marquise's heir. Before he could dwell too much on that, Luca suggested that Camille show him around, since she knew the school district well. Camille agreed, saying she owed him for the manga anyway. Just this once, she'd make an exception and act as his guide. Alan gratefully accepted the offer, feeling relieved to have someone with him on this next step of his journey. Later on, Camille and Alan arrived at the school district. Camille explained that it was the largest district in the royal capital, home not only to various schools but also to government-run research facilities. As she continued to chatter on, Alan quietly appreciated having her by his side. Amid their walk, Camille's focus shifted to the cold gift Alan had brought along. Without wasting time, she urged him to head toward the checkpoint. When they reached it, Alan presented his promika medals to the guard, leaving the man visibly stunned by what he saw. In an instant, the two were given permission to pass. Camille was dazed by the view, saying that it was nostalgic. Alan was just as amazed, thinking to himself that it felt like a completely different world. Just then, he spotted a majestic building nearby, and he asked Camille what it was. She explained that it was the Sandrique Theological School's Grand Cathedral, and it was the only religious school in the royal capital. Alan was intrigued by the idea of a religious school, so he asked what was being studied there. Camille simply replied that it was theology, but they also studied medicine, holy magic, and healing magic. Healing magic in particular required special training. She also shared that their vice captain, Nana, graduated from a religious school. Alan was surprised, while Camille went on to share that Nana could also use both healing magic and holy magic. People said that her reputation was even higher than the captain's, which Camille thought was impressive. Now that Alan had thought about it, he realized that he hadn't talked to the vice captains yet. Camille explained that they were both really busy. On top of that, Rafine hated men, so Alan should probably keep his distance. The mental image Alan had of Rafine scared him, so he made sure to keep that in mind. Just then, Alan turned the focus to Camille, asking her what school she went to. She shared that she went to Lyosol Magic School, a low-tier magic school that was made for commoners. Alan was surprised that she mentioned a low-tier school, which suggested there was a ranking system. Magic aptitude was inherited, so nobles went to higher-ranking magic schools. The N5 Academy that they were visiting today was a school for the elites. Even royalty went there. Alan now understood that this kingdom was basically built on a magic caste system. They refined strong bloodlines to produce stronger magic users, and that was how the kingdom of Cain Risa came to power. Not long after, the two reached their destination. Alan said it sounded unreal, and Camille agreed, saying it was a distant world for commoners like them. Just then, she pointed to the distance, saying they were almost there. Finally, they could see the N5 Magic Academy from afar. Alan was stunned, wondering to himself why everything was so huge. The school was basically a castle. Not long after, they approached the gates, and Alan told the guard that he had a promessa medal. He asked if his escort could enter too, and the guard permitted it. After that, the guard took Alan's right hand and put a special bracelet on him. Alan asked what it was, and the guard explained that it was a magical device meant for security measures. It was nothing personal. Camille added that it could alert the guards if he broke any rules, so she advised him to be careful. Alan was not amused, sarcastically asking if he had gone there just to commit crimes. Bro got hit with the congratulations. "You're on probation" bracelet. They soon entered the school grounds, and Camille was amazed. It was totally different from Lyosol. She then pointed to the famous Lion's Dormitory where the royal family had lived for generations. Alan was surprised, unable to believe that something that grand was a dormitory. As they continued their walk, Camille asked who exactly they were meeting. Alan explained that it was Ray Castellano, the customer at the street festival. Just then, Camille stopped in her tracks, prompting Alan to look back. He called out her name, but Camille only asked him to say the name again. Alan repeated Ray Castellano's name, adding that he was the heir to the House of Castellano. Camille closed her eyes, then out of nowhere ran away in a flash. Alan grabbed her hand before she could escape, but she squirmed and demanded to be let go. She asked why he was meeting a high-ranking noble, so Alan reminded her that he had already told her. Camille shivered at the thought that Castellano was one of the 3 great magic houses. If a commoner magician tried to meet them, that would be treason. Alan, on the other hand, tried to tell her that she was overreacting. However, Camille was still defiant, making it clear that she wasn't going to go. Suddenly, she stopped resisting and fell quiet. She told Alan that beside the Shishi dormitory, where the royal family resided, There were 3 other dorms, each belonging to one of the 3 magic noble houses. Since the Castellano family was part of the Owashi dormitory, that was where they should go. Alan was weirded out, but he thanked her anyway. Just then, Camille revealed the catch. Now that she had shown him the way, she asked if she could go home. Bro just got the tutorial, but his party member rage quit. However, Alan only reminded her that she didn't have a promika for this place, which might get her caught if she left. Camille was distraught, still refusing to meet the heir to a marquis family. At best, she would be meeting some knight or a low-ranking baron. Alan mentally said sorry to Camille, thinking he would just apologize properly later. Shortly after, they reached the Castellano family's home, where they were immediately greeted by a butler. The butler informed Alan that they had been expecting him, and that they should follow him. Ray was to return shortly, so they should wait for him in the meantime. And so, Alan and Camille waited for Ray. Alan noticed that Camille was looking pale, but she argued that she was fine. They both kept quiet for a while, but Alan soon noticed that Camille was acting unusually. He asked if she was sure about being okay, and Camille insisted she was. It was just that it felt like her soul was leaving her body for a second. It truly almost did. Suddenly the door opened, catching their attention. They got up and went to the door, seeing Ray in the flesh. Ray smiled at Alan and said it had been a while since the street festival. Alan bowed and thanked him for the invitation, but Ray insisted there was no need for formalities. He was the one who called him over, so he should just relax. Suddenly a girl walked past Alan, stunning him for a moment. She stood right next to Ray and asked who the gentleman was. Ray chuckled and said he was his friend, which made Alan a little tense. The girl stared at Alan with her empty eyes, making him worry that he did something wrong. He was flustered, wondering why she was staring at him. Alan's in the "did I leave the stove on" stage of panic. He turned to Camille, hoping that she could help him out, but she was just useless at the moment. To get rid of the awkwardness, Alan handed the gift to Ray. Ray asked what it was, so Alan explained that it was a special dessert prepared for their meeting. Because of its delicate storage requirements, it wasn't usually sold in shops. Without wasting time, Ray clapped his hands to summon the butler. In an instant, the butler set up the table for them to enjoy Alan's delicacy. Alan was amazed, seeing how fast everything was set up. Just then, the butler asked if the delicacy had to be cut to pieces, but Alan said no, it was already individually portioned. Finally, Alan unveiled the delicacy. Ray's eyes widened with curiosity as Alan explained that it was called Akira. Based on Ray's reaction, Alan was convinced that the fruit tart was definitely the right choice. The girl, though, was still staring at him. Alan tried to redirect his attention by explaining to Ray that the dessert was best enjoyed cold. He suggested eating it before they start talking. He handed some tart to Camille, but it seemed like she was dying inside. After finishing the tart, Ray remembered that he was yet to introduce himself. He went on to say that he was Ray Castellano, and he was in his first year at the N5 Academy's middle school division. He then praised Alan, saying he was right about him. The tart was the best dessert he ever had. Hearing that, Alan was honored that he thought of him that way. Just then, Ray introduced his cousin, Chris Arisa, the girl from before. Noticing her silence, Ray asked Chris what was wrong. She was usually all cool and composed, but this was extreme. Just then, Chris told Ray to be quiet for a bit. Alan was amazed, witnessing how Chris casually spoke to the heir of a marquis family. Ray suddenly told Chris that lying wasn't good, then he mentioned that she had another name. Alan seemed confused, so Ray explained that commoners like him and Camille only had first names. However, Ray was a noble, so he had a family name as well. Chris, on the other hand, had even more than that. Suddenly, Alan was starstruck as Ray explained that he was in the presence of Chris Isekai'd, the princess of this kingdom. Alan couldn't believe that he was in front of a royal. Chris Isekai'd, if he remembered correctly, she was the second princess of this country. This made him wonder why she was in a place like this. Chris's father was from a family connected to the Castellano house. His magical power was on par with the head of the Castellano family. He was summoned to the royal family and married into royalty. In other words, despite being from a collateral royal line, Chris had a high claim to the throne. Ray went on to share that Chris was an awakened one of royal descent. Her magical power surpassed that of past kings. Alan asked what this meant, so Ray explained that awakened ones were those who exist among commoners like Alan. These were people who possessed enormous magical powers regardless of their bloodline. Ray thought of an example, then looked at Alan with a knowing face. He was pertaining to people like him. Man looked at Alan like, "It's you. You're the plot twist." Alan was stunned, but Ray continued speaking. The Zen religion called awakened ones divine children chosen by the creation of God. Yet Ray still wondered what the truth really was. Awakened ones had a sensitivity far removed from the general public. That was why Ray wanted to arrange for Chris to meet Alan this time. Alan kept quiet, only realizing that everything was set up. From what he had heard, the princess must be a reincarnated person too. In that case, it would be unwise to speak carelessly on his own. However, he couldn't remain silent when dealing with nobility either. He now wondered what he should do. Suddenly Chris spoke, telling Ray that being awakened didn't make the person special. She also reminded him that Alan was troubled by those unfounded suspicions. Ray tried to argue, but Chris cut him off, asking how it would affect him if the rumors about Alan were true. Reincarnated people were few in number, and even if they were strong, they were most at the level of a Viscount. She asked if that was right, but an awkward silence followed. Finally, Ray yielded, and he confirmed that Chris was right. He suddenly apologized to Alan, asking if he scared him. Alan reassured him that he didn't, but he remained vigilant, noticing that neither of them seemed like children. Suddenly, Ray mentioned that he had one more thing that he wanted to discuss. Alan asked what it was, so Ray informed him that he would like to regularly purchase goods from him in the future. Things like the items from the street fair and the sweets they had earlier. In return, he would support him and his brigade. He asked Alan about his thoughts, and Alan thanked him and said he would be delighted to. However, this was only from his side, and he still had to check with the commander first. He hadn't told Sayonji anything yet. Ray reassured him that it was all right and that he would submit the paperwork to the commander. With that, Ray stood and thanked Alan for the meeting. He also gave his regards to the commander. As Ray and his guards left, Alan checked on Camille, calling out to her. Camille apologized, then she excused herself to get some fresh air. Meanwhile, Alan thought that she was safe after all. Now it was only Alan and Chris in the room. Chris broke the silence and asked Alan if he had a moment. Alan said yes, mentioning that he also wanted to talk to the princess. However, Chris remained silent and only stared at him. Alan was anxious, realizing how tough it was being alone with her. On top of that, she was still glaring at him. Suddenly, Chris asked if she could brush his bangs aside before they started the discussion. Despite his confusion, Alan lifted his bangs, revealing his entire face. Chris stuttered, making Alan more puzzled than ever. Her eyes lit up in excitement, saying he was Whitehorse Kyun from One Step. Whitehorse Kyun sounds like a discontinued Starbucks drink. She said he was cool, which confused Alan. She started to blush, saying that the more she looked, the more Alan looked like Whitehorse Kyun. Alan asked who that was, but Chris didn't answer and only told him to lift his bangs one more time. After that, she explained that Whitehorse Kyun was an idol who appeared in a social game called One Step. His name was Kazuhoshi Hakuba, and he was her favorite. Alan wanted to confirm if he looked like a character from a social game, but Chris made it clear that it wasn't just the resemblance. He was his reincarnation. Bro's about to get Isekai'd twice. Like Whitehorse Kyun, who used to be on the basketball team, Alan was tall with hair like golden threads and emerald eyes. Even their low voices were identical. Suddenly, Chris melancholically recalled that it had been a long journey, and it had been several years ago. Back then, Chris was formerly known as Yui Sakakibara, a second-year university student. There was a new costume gacha and event for Whitehorse Kyun around that time. However, she now wondered what to do since she was broke from the concert tickets. She needed to increase her part-time shifts, but this wouldn't allow her to grind the events. She fell silent for a while, then declared that she would quit university. Her friend was unfazed, merely saying that she never changed. On top of that, she was eating bean sprouts again. Her friend asked if she was okay, but Yui, with a proud face, boasted that it was a way to save money. Her friend made it clear that she wasn't praising her, though. She handed some fried chicken to Yui, and she thanked her for it. Chris's life revolved around her favorite idol. She cut corners in her daily life, but those days were fulfilling. However, one day that everyday life suddenly ended. Then she gained wealth, power, talent, and beauty, all in exchange for Whitehorse Kyun's existence. Since then, he had only existed in her heart. She cried as she thought about it, claiming that those days were painful. Alan, who witnessed her trauma dump, merely said that it must have been difficult. He didn't really get it, but he assumed she had been through a lot. Just then, Chris said that it was okay because she was now able to meet Whitehorse like this. Being sent to another world must be fate. This alarmed Alan, so he reminded her he was not Whitehorse. This didn't stop Chris, and she kept walking towards Alan. She suddenly grabbed him and slammed him on the wall, telling him to stay still. As Chris creepily came closer, Alan got worried that something weird had been triggered. Chris suddenly pinned him down and tied his hands, so Alan pleaded with her to stop, reminding her that a princess shouldn't be doing these kinds of things in such places. However, Chris reassured him that there was no need to worry, as she could easily suppress any rumors. Princess out here doing side quests in the 18+ category. Hearing this, Alan told her that the situation was not funny at all. Even though he was a reincarnated person too, he couldn't break free from her clutches. This made him wonder where Chris got all this strength. Desperate, Alan screamed for help, but Chris only revealed that the room was soundproof. She suddenly sat on top of him, telling him that he wouldn't be able to move either. In her past life, she didn't have any experience, but she had done a lot of studying. She then told Alan that if he could count the stains on the ceiling, it would be over soon, so he should just stop resisting. Alan prepared himself for what was to come, while Chris mustered all her courage. However, before Chris could do anything, Camille suddenly entered the room. Chris was caught in the act, sitting on top of Alan while undoing his buttons. As expected of Camille, she passed out at the mere sight of this. Camille saw that and her soul immediately hit the eject button. Chris suddenly bowed her head in apology, thinking that of all people she had lost her composure in front of her idol. She couldn't believe what she had done. Alan, on the other hand, questioned her choice of words. At any rate, Alan should be thankful to Camille. Who knew what could have happened if he were alone? Just then, Alan turned to the princess, wanting to talk to her about something. However, Chris cut him off, insisting on being called Sakakibara. There was no need for formalities in this situation, and that was an order. Having no choice, Alan said he understood. He addressed Chris as Sakakibara. Then he asked if she was reincarnated or transferred. From what she said earlier, it seemed like she was suddenly brought there. Chris replied that in her case it seemed like a possession. Only Sakakibara Yui's consciousness was sent to this world, and her memories and personality were synchronized with Chris's. Alan asked if it was like she had two separate personalities, but Chris said no. It was more like both consciousnesses merged to form her current personality. In other words, the kingdom's strongest otaku girl. That's what happened. Alan now understood, yet he was surprised. He had never heard of that pattern before. Chris didn't know the details either, and this was her first time meeting an awakened one. Given her position, she couldn't easily go outside. The people in this world were so good-looking that she got nervous just trying to talk to them. In the end, she was rumored to be weird and unsociable. Alan acknowledged her struggles. Then he went on to share that he had lived for 20 years, but he thought it was rare to meet an awakened one in everyday life. It might be different if one were an adventurer, especially someone from the same world. Chris agreed, thinking they were definitely different. Meanwhile, Alan decided that it was better to keep quiet about Sayonji for now. Just then, Camille, who was resting on Alan's lap, started to wake up. Chris quickly stood up, saying they had talked for a long time and that she was glad they had met that day. She also promised to send a letter of support to the brigade later. Not just for trading goods, but she would be happy to talk again as fellow Otherworlders. Alan agreed to it, making Chris smile. She said it was a promise, and she referred to Alan as Whitehorse Kyun. However, she quickly realized that she had made a mistake, and she asked for his name. Alan introduced himself, but he said Shinjo was fine too. Later on, Camille regained her consciousness. Alan was carrying her on his back, much to her confusion. She asked where she was, but Alan didn't answer, and was only glad that she had finally woken up. He asked how she was feeling and if she was unwell, but Camille reassured him she was fine. She tried to backtrack everything that happened. She remembered meeting Ray and the princess. Then it struck her. When she returned to the room, the princess was on top of Alan. The thought of it still horrified her. Alan, on the other hand, was embarrassed that Camille still remembered everything. Just then, Alan asked her what she was talking about. He tried brainwashing her, suggesting that she had collapsed right after leaving the room. Alan's whole vibe is, if I say it confidently enough, it's canon. She must have had a strange dream. Camille fell silent, but she ultimately fell for it. She believed Alan, thinking that there was no way that could have happened. With that, Alan apologized for deceiving her. He didn't mean to push her to the point of collapsing. Camille could only wish that it had been a dream too. To make up for what he had done, Alan gave Camille the next volume of Yuma Koi. Camille burst with joy, hugging Alan as she forgave him. Alan, on the other hand, called her out for pulling his hair. Just then, he told her that if she were that energetic, then she could walk on her own. Camille refused, saying that if she didn't read Yuma Koi right away, she might faint again. Alan couldn't do anything about it, as Camille was his benefactor. This truly wasn't cheap. However, Camille overheard his complaints and she asked if he had said anything. Later on, they had finally returned to the guild. Alan thought it was tough back then, but things had been peaceful lately. Suddenly he was summoned by the commander, so he immediately went to see her. Upon entering her office, Sayonji immediately asked him what on earth he had done. Alan asked what she meant, so Sayonji rummaged through a pile of papers, revealing some letters from Chris and Ray. She had summoned Alan because of the letter of support from the second princess and the Marquis family. She asked if this was Alan's doing, and he replied that a lot had happened and it was a long story. Sayonji sighed, then she bluntly told him that all her plans had gone to waste because of him. Alan asked if he interfered, but Sayonji said no. In fact, she was rather grateful. She then asked Alan if he knew why she stopped working as an adventurer, but he said no. Sayonji went on to explain that she quit because, in order to operate in the royal capital, she needed connections, a stable supply of resources, securing blacksmiths, and more. All of those were difficult without social credibility. Alan was surprised to know that it applied to a brigade at their level, despite having strong members. Sayonji continued, explaining that in provincial cities it was enough to talk to the local lord. But even if you make a name elsewhere in the royal capital, you can be looked down upon just for being a woman. Actually, none of the nobles or trading companies she contacted were decent people. Back then, they asked a noble for his support, but he asked what was in it for him. Sayonji replied that they would pay him a portion of the funds that they would earn from their activities. However, the noble cut her off, saying that he wasn't in need of money and preferred something else. Sayonji asked what it was, and the nobleman revealed that he wanted her to become his mistress. If she didn't want to, any of her other female members would do. They did have quite a collection of pretty faces. Sayonji kept silent, but Rafin, her companion at the time, furiously called the nobleman a bastard. Sayonji calmed her down. Then she told the nobleman to pretend that this ever happened. She had no intention of selling herself or her comrades. As they stood up to leave, the nobleman called them insolent women. Sayonji remained composed, and she left that room with her dignity intact. If audacity was currency, that nobleman would be Jeffrey Epstein. Hearing all of this, Alan couldn't help but feel terrible. Sayonji went on to say that they had similar experiences before, but this was the first time they had been treated with such disrespect. Alan asked if it had happened before, and Sayonji confirmed it, saying it was common not just in the royal capital. In the end, all men were like that. Judging by this, Alan assumed that Sayonji had been through a lot. Maybe that was why they naturally ended up with only female members. Alan fell silent, but Sayonji was quick to notice it. She suddenly apologized, saying that there were people like Alan too. She just got a bit whiny. However, Alan reassured her that it was only natural given what happened. Suddenly, Alan asked her about the name of the man she mentioned earlier. Sayonji revealed that it was Alex Byrne, the chairman of the Byrne Trading Company. Alan noticed that he had a family name, so he asked if he was a noble. Sayonji said he wasn't, but apparently he ingratiated himself with an impoverished knight family. Sayonji noted that the man usually ran a transport business connecting the royal capital and provincial cities, so she advised Alan to be careful. Alan made sure to keep that in mind. Just then he told Sayonji to get some rest, as he was noticing bags under her eyes. She didn't argue, and she reassured him she would. After that, they proceeded to work on some papers. As Alan helped, he noticed that the work had increased. He thought that they wouldn't need to look for connections anymore. Sayonji was about to explain, but she was cut off mid-sentence when Aina entered the room, informing her that there were a lot of people who wanted to meet with her. She suddenly noticed Alan, and she thought it was the perfect timing. Just then, Sayonji informed Aina that thanks to Alan, they were going to receive support from the Marquis family and the second princess. It seemed trading companies had heard the rumors and were flocking there. Aina was shocked, unable to believe the news about the Marquis family and the second princess. She couldn't wrap her head around the situation, so Alan tried to simplify it by saying that they just liked his goods. However, Aina argued that it was not the kind of acquaintance that he would make by chance. Sayonji felt sorry to ask this of Aina, but she wanted her to take care of the visitors. She told her to simply listen to what they had to say, and she would organize the information from there. Aina hesitatingly agreed, and before she left, she told Alan to explain everything to her later. Alan worriedly agreed, thinking to himself that he never thought it would come to this. Suddenly, Sayonji spoke, saying that Princess Chris didn't usually make public appearances. They were probably curious about her connection to the brigade. However, this worked in their favor. At this rate, they should quickly establish their operational base. When they restarted their adventuring business, she would need Alan's help too. Alan then asked what exactly she needed him to do. He volunteered to handle the procurement, but he was hesitant about other things. Sayonji explained to him that ideally she wanted him to be the brigade's exclusive merchant. Their team mainly focused on monster subjugation, so some requests could involve large sums of money if possible. She would like to sell materials without going through the guild. For now, they would maintain the status quo because they were still short on manpower and experience. She insisted on securing the personnel on their end, but this made Alan concerned as the workload might be too much for her. Sayonji reassured him she would be fine, and if anything, she was happy to be busy. Having no choice, Alan trusted her. Just then, Sayonji called out his name, reminding him that she had already told him before that being thanked for something he did for himself would throw him off balance. Alan recalled that she did say this. Sayonji continued, saying that for her, this was what adventuring work was about. It started to return to her original world, but now, it was a bit different. So she would prioritize what was in front of her now. It was all for the sake of everyone who had been with her all this time. Alan smiled as he listened, acknowledging her thoughts. Sayonji then reassured Alan that there was no need to worry. After that, she asked him to go help Aina. Alan complied, thinking to himself that he should learn from this too. Later on, Aina and Alan had finally finished all their tasks. Aina complained that it was tough when people kept coming day after day. It made negotiations easier, but still. Just then, she turned to Alan, hinting that a certain someone still wouldn't give her the details. However, Alan only feigned innocence, and he said that was all there was to it. After that, Aina shared that they had narrowed down some promising trading companies, and they might make it in time for the regular meeting at this rate. Alan was intrigued about the regular meeting, so Aina explained that this was where squad leaders would give status reports periodically. There was an upcoming one next month. Aina shared that it was her first time attending, which somehow interested Alan. Until now, Aina was the only one in the supply squad, so she was excused. She couldn't manage it on her own. Alan acknowledged it, then he told Aina to prepare the accounting documents. She asked if he was sure, but then she realized that Alan was pretty accurate with calculations. If anything, it was his forte. Alan admitted that she was right, but when he noticed the pause in Aina's tone, he reminded her that he was not doing all the calculations himself. Aina shrugged that off and headed for the door, telling him that she was counting on him. When Alan was finally alone, he quickly used his powers to return to the real world, thinking that at times like these, modern conveniences were truly a blessing. In an instant, he returned to Japan, where a computer set was ready for him to finish his task faster. He mentally thanked Akira for doing half of the work, like teaching him how to use spreadsheet software and settings. Teleporting to Japan for Excel is the nerdiest flex in history. Just then, Alan turned his attention to the budget and he noticed that the expense was particularly high. He also noticed the maintenance cost for regular potions, which reminded him of something. He visited Japan regularly, and it wasn't just for product procurement, it was mainly to share information and help with gate research. However, it was difficult to maintain the gate for long periods and other magic couldn't be used. Instead, research on magical power was being conducted using otherworld materials he brought. As part of that, he brought in medicinal herbs and potions. He now planned to ask about it. At that moment, he called Akira over the phone and she promptly picked up. To his shock, Akira appeared behind him asking if he was calling for her. He stuttered, asking how long she had been there. Akira nonchalantly replied that she had just arrived, which made Alan think that he was being monitored. She was just too fast. In the Saionji Group top-secret research facility called Leaf, Yoshida, the chief plant researcher, greeted Alan. Alan apologized for the sudden visit, knowing he was busy. However, Yoshida was actually glad that he came as he wanted to report to him. He explained right away, revealing how the potion worked. The liquid penetrated the cell membrane, abnormally activating the nucleus and promoting cell proliferation. It also seemed to temporarily compensate for damaged areas, so wounds would heal faster. Alan asked Yoshida to explain in simpler terms, so the man elaborately said that the potion could dramatically enhance the natural healing ability that humans originally possessed to heal wounds. However, the genetic information of the medicinal herbs used as ingredients wasn't that different from Earth's plants, at least not enough to have such a dramatic effect on the human body. Alan suddenly cut Yoshida off, saying that it was not the power of the plants themselves. Yoshida confirmed he was right, and it seemed that the unknown energy called magical power was involved. They had expected this from Alan's physical examination. As Alan recalled all his tests, he remembered that he had set world records that exceeded the average human. If built different was a medical diagnosis, this is it. Just then, he realized that Saionji and Sakakibara were stronger than him. Yoshida noticed that Alan was lost in thought, so he asked if there was something wrong, but the young man said no. Just then, Yoshida mentioned that they had succeeded in cultivating some of the medicinal herbs, intriguing Alan. He realized that plants could be brought over alive, which was strange since they could pass through the gate. Despite the astonishing news, Yoshida revealed that their effectiveness was halved in this world. It was probably because there was less magical essence. Even so, if they could establish a cultivation method, it would be worthy of a Nobel Prize. As it stood, most of them would eventually die off. Alan guessed it was natural since they only grew in limited areas in the other world, and it seemed difficult to grow them. Just then, Yoshida mentioned that he was curious about the reverse case. He suddenly asked Alan if plants from this world could retain magical essence, and if they could, what effects would it have? Just then, their conversation was cut short when a woman named Tsukamoto entered the room, saying she had been called. Yoshida turned to Alan, telling him he had a request. He then told Tsukamoto to guide Alan. Not long after, Tsukamoto led Alan to Research Lab 3, which was filled with common earth plants. They gathered the ones with genes similar to the other world's medicinal herbs. Just then, Tsukamoto asked Alan to try infusing the plants with magical power, even just a little bit. Alan complied, though he disclosed that he had never done it before. He directed his palm towards a shelf filled with plants. Then he focused. As Yoshida expected, they couldn't see anything. Even Tsukamoto was disappointed at the outcome. Alan felt a bit sorry, but he definitely felt something. Now it only depended on the examination. After that, Tsukamoto thanked Alan for his participation and she told them that they'd let him know once the results came in. She also shared that, like the potion, there was a possibility that the magical essence would gradually dissipate, so they might ask him to use magic again several times. Alan was surprised, then he told her that he also had a request. Upon returning to Asfial, Alan immediately handed the financial statements to Aina. He also told her that the reports should be fine. As they walked to the regular meeting, Alan asked Aina if the event was that strict. Aina didn't know because it was her first time, and that was why she was frantically checking. Alan tried to calm her down, telling her not to worry because he would back her up if anything happened. He couldn't help but notice just how nervous she was, though. Suddenly, Aina said that she had been wondering about the luggage that Alan had been carrying. Alan asked if she was referring to what he was holding, then he told her that he would explain later. Aina glared at this, as he had never properly explained anything when he said he would. Alan smiled awkwardly, saying he had been explaining as much as he could. He walked forward, saying that he thought about it for the brigade's sake, so she shouldn't worry about that. Aina fell silent, noticing that he had changed a bit. Confused, Alan asked what she meant. At the meeting, Raffen, the vice commander, announced to everyone that she had completed gathering information about the dungeons around the royal capital. Several teams had been scheduled to challenge the dungeons the day after tomorrow. After that, the magic squad was called for their report. Nana, the leader of the magic squad, announced that ever since Alan joined, they had been getting lots of male adventurers wanting to join. However, none of them showed much promise, so they turned them all down. Alan was stunned to know this, as this had been happening without his knowledge. He felt kinda bad about it. Just then, Nana said that this was not exactly a replacement, but there was someone she would like to recommend. Sayonji asked who it was, and Nana revealed it to be Piana Ishan, who was from a knight family. She had a high aptitude for healing magic, and she should be ready in about 6 months. Sayonji keenly read Piana's information, then she admitted that she was the kind of talent they wanted. She was hesitant, but Nana reassured her it would be okay. She was the only one who noticed Piana's potential, so if they wanted to recruit her, now was the time. Sayonji yielded, trusting her comrade's words to be true. Piana's conditions could be the same as Nana's, and she wanted her to take care of it. Nana was overjoyed, saying that she understood. When Sayonji was about to call on the next reporter, Aina immediately stood up. Sis jumped up like her seat was on fire. She anxiously informed everyone that given the incident from yesterday, all negotiations for supplies had been settled. They had also secured the blacksmiths. Alan sat silently beside her, cheering her on. Sayonji acknowledged the report, then she asked if there was anything else. Aina stuttered, frantically flipping through her papers to come up with a response. The other brigade members told her it was okay, and that she should take her time. Alan, on the other hand, was reminded of the time when he was a company employee. He could definitely see that Aina was trying her best. Suddenly, Alan raised his hand, saying that there was one more thing he wanted to report. Sayonji asked what it was, so Alan told Aina to pass a certain item to everyone in the meeting. After reviewing the brigade's expenses, Alan found an issue with the maintenance costs of potions. Sayonji was surprised as she received the item from Alan. It was a new potion container he made using his connections. Compared to the conventional glass containers, this one was more durable, lighter, and less bulky. The most notable feature was the usable period. Due to special treatment, they could now be stored for about 4 times longer than usual, and they could be preserved for 1 month. For more details, everyone could just refer to the document. The brigade members were shocked, unable to believe that it could last for 1 month. They thought a week was the limit, and they doubted if they could trust the potion. It was too ridiculous, and there was no way it could last that long. Sayonji told everyone to be quiet, then she told them that she understood their doubts. However, did they really think he'd tell such an easily disprovable lie? One of the members wanted to argue, but Sayonji cut her off. She then announced to everyone that they could use the new potions alongside conventional potions for 1 month. The results should speak for themselves. Sayonji asked Alan if this was fine with him, and he agreed to it. Sayonji then told everyone that if there were no objections, then she would conclude the meeting. She also reminded everyone to share the information with their squad members. After the meeting, Alan headed to his room. He believed that the new invention should solve the potion maintenance cost issue, and he had to thank Yoshida and the others for it. Just then, he turned his attention to the rose before him. In his last visit to Japan, Tsukamoto informed him that, as a result of his cooperation, they statistically confirmed that roses could retain the most magical essence. While other plants showed toxicity harmful to humans, roses had effects similar to medicinal herbs. With that, they wanted Alan to cultivate the roses they had prepared in the other world. Alan acknowledged this, and he agreed to do the task. Tsukamoto insisted on preparing extra just in case. A few samples should be enough. This was the result. When Alan told Sayonji, she stopped him from reporting to the lab. However, he admitted that the mutation was probably his fault, given what he had done last time. He wondered if pouring in magic at full power would yield results faster. He couldn't just throw the rose away, so he thought about experimenting to see if it could substitute for medicinal herbs. Later on, Alan approached Mei, telling her that he wanted to learn how to make potions. He heard Mei knew a lot about it, and she quickly agreed to teach him. As she rummaged through her shelf, she told him that she probably didn't have much to teach. Just then, Alan told her that this time it was not about ordinary medicinal herbs, which confused Mei. Alan clarified that he was talking about pseudo-medicinal herbs. Then he showed her the roses he infused with magic. May was surprised, as she had never seen a plant like that before. She thought Alan was mysterious as ever, and he laughed awkwardly at that. After that, they proceeded to experiment with the roses. With a bit of tweaking, May expected the potion to work fine, but they should give it a try for now. She said sorry in advance in case it failed. Just then, May asked Alan how he knew about potions, but he clarified that he didn't know much, just the basics. With that, May explained briefly. First, potions come in 4 colors and 3 grades. There are 12 types in total. The lowest grade, green 3rd grade, could treat chapped skin and bruises. Purple could regenerate lost body parts, and the part could vary depending on the grade. Alan was surprised, not knowing it could do that much. May continued, saying that they only used up to blue, so they didn't deal with the others because they had Nana. Purple potions were considered rare in the market because the necessary herbs could only grow in dangerous places. They were quite scarce. Now that Alan thought about it, he had never seen them for sale. May explained that this was because it was the highest grade of potions humans could create. Alan suddenly asked about red potions, and May said they were now legendary. At least none had been found in over a decade. Also known as Ichor, or Blood of God, the effect of a 1st grade is resurrection or true revival, though there was no record of red 1st grade actually existing. However, even 2nd grade and below could heal fatal wounds, and they also had rejuvenating effects. Originally, it was one of the holy relics rarely found in high-difficulty dungeons, but now they might all have been fished out. Alan noticed that May had shed a tear as she said this, so he asked if she was okay. Just then, May stopped crying when she noticed that the potion had been completed. To their surprise, it was purple. Alan recalled that May said it was rare, and she confirmed it, adding that it was her first time creating one. Alan asked how much it was worth, and May replied that in the black market it would sell for 500,000 gold. It took a while for that to sink in, but it eventually shocked Alan. Later on, they presented the potion to Sayonji. Sayonji said Alan was mind-blowing, but in a good way. Just then, Alan shared that he was expecting it to be about blue potion level. Aina chimed in, saying that normally artificial cultivation of medicinal herbs was impossible. She believed that Alan shouldn't release it into the market as an individual, as it would definitely cause a commotion. However, they couldn't waste it either, so she recommended selling it to the guild. Sayonji said it was the opposite. Releasing something this valuable through the guild would be bad for the brigade's external reputation. Alan seemed confused, so Sayonji explained that they could do proper business without going through the guild. Not just competitors, but even guild staff would think that deep down. Soon, Alan would be the one affected by it. Alan agreed that it would indeed be troublesome. Sayonji thought this was perfect, though. She tasked Alan to go to the black market as a social study. The capital's black market wasn't illegal. Alan was hesitant, but Sayonji reassured him that there was no need to hide the team's name. If he were worried about causing trouble, he wouldn't be able to operate. Alan was surprised, and he couldn't believe that Sayonji was actually a high school girl. She was more mature than he was. Sayonji then told Alan and Aina to keep it a secret from the other team members. She also wanted Aina to accompany Alan, which somehow her. Sayonji reminded Aina that if they could sell it, they could make a deal worth 5 million. How was Aina going to handle it when she, the person in charge, was absent? Aina sulked, having no choice but to agree. With that, Sayonji left the room, leaving everything to the two. Just then, Alan remembered that he had forgotten to ask Sayonji about what to do with the roses for the remaining potions. Aina asked what was wrong, but Alan said it was nothing. That night, Alan created more potions from the roses. He was still amazed, thinking it could be worth 5 million. He couldn't tell May the details about the magic roses, so he had to make the remaining potions himself. He used up all the remaining roses, which were about 50, and he wondered if that was okay. He had to get it ready for tomorrow's black market, so he had no choice but to believe. Shortly after, he poured some of the potion into a test tube, but he was confused when it turned red in color. The amount had decreased quite a bit, making him wonder if he had failed. There was no way it could be a red potion, and he was convinced it was a reddish purple. There was a tingling sensation, but it was not evaporating. Alan was more confused than ever. It was clearly different from purple, and if it were discovered, it would undoubtedly become a huge problem. The water purification facilities weren't adequate, so who knew what would happen if he poured it out? If he just dumped it somewhere and it was found, it could endanger everyone. In that case, it was time for the last resort. He would bury it in uncharted territory. Alan quickly used his magic to teleport into a world of nothingness. He stepped into the barren land thinking it was perfect. He planned to hide it and get out. Just then, he gazed into the sky and saw a strong beam of light coming from a giant spacecraft. He thought it was some kind of space elevator, which only meant it was absolutely no good. With that, Alan left the place and went somewhere else. Eventually, he settled in a prehistoric location, the land of the dinosaurs. There, he decided to bury it with the bottle. If Jurassic Park 5 has mutant T-Rexes, we know who to blame. The next morning, dark circles formed under Alan's eyes. Aina noticed he was out of it, so she asked if he was all right and if he lacked sleep. Alan quickly used that excuse, saying he had a bit of trouble falling asleep. Aina asked if he was too nervous to sleep, but Alan, who was barely awake, didn't answer and only asked who was there. Aina finally confirmed that this man was indeed half asleep. Alan apologized, but Aina understood. She was part support staff, part adventurer. The black market in the royal capital was supposed to have relatively decent security, but in Alan's case, he had connections with the princess and even made purple potions. She told him to still take precautions, as she assumed that he didn't have any combat experience. Alan apologized for that and he thought about doing some training next time. However, Aina told him to relax as she would protect him properly. She then headed for the door, urging him to hurry up, or they would be late. Meanwhile, Alan was surprised because Aina really believed he couldn't sleep because of nervousness. Just then, he remembered that he had to switch gears too. He promptly followed Aina, telling her he was coming. Not long after, they arrived at the royal capital's black market. Alan had just finished the preparations, which was simply setting up their booth. He simply placed the purple potion there along with the appraisal certificate, as he didn't have anything else to sell anyway. Still, he thought the black market would be more sinister. Hearing that, Aina reminded him that the commander already told him that the black market wasn't actually illegal. It was just a market not managed by the country or the guild. The goods were all legitimate. Still, they needed to be careful. When Alan asked why, Aina explained that one could sell for several times the guild's price, but that meant customers were desperate too. Even if they haggled you down, you wouldn't be charged with a crime. Alan sarcastically asked if he looked like someone who would give in to haggling, but Aina said no. Still, everything she said was true. Just then, Alan shifted the topic, saying that it was almost time for the opening. As soon as shops opened for business, the place suddenly turned chaotic. People ran in all directions, while some argued and pushed each other. Even Alan and Aina were shocked by how fast people ran before them. Alan asked if the black market was always like that, but Aina said no. There were clearly too many people. She wondered if there was something rare being sold, while Alan was starting to get a bit worried. They both hoped they could leave early. Moments later, a man approached their shop asking if the potion was the real deal. Alan confirmed it, asking the man if he could see the appraisal certificate. Still, the man was skeptical, arguing that anyone could forge something like that. Just then, the man offered 1.3 million for the potion, but Alan said that his offer was the price for a first-grade blue potion. It was clearly impossible. As Alan had expected, these customers really were like this. He was bound to be interrogated about the red and purple potions. Suddenly, the man noticed Aina, so he rudely called out to her and asked why she was letting Alan do all the talking. Aina bluntly told the man that he was noisy, and if he wasn't buying, then he should go somewhere else. Dumbfounded, the man started to get angry, but Aina only told him to shut up. If he wasn't buying, then he should leave their shop because he was interfering with their business. The man furiously asked what she said, clearly baffled that a woman dared to speak to him that way. He lifted his heavy hand, prepared to slap some sense into Aina. However, Alan caught his hand, telling him he was going too far. The man told Alan to shut up, saying he was talking to the woman. Then, out of nowhere, a powerful punch landed on the man's face, stunning Alan as he watched everything unfold. The man was sent hurling into the streets, shocking Alan and a few other bystanders. Even Aina was surprised by what she did. Alan advised her to be more careful in the future, and Aina embarrassingly agreed. She was horrified by the thought that an adventurer like her raised a hand on a civilian. Sensing her regret, Alan told her that from now on she could leave situations like that to him. She turned civilian into civilian casualty. Aina sulked in misery, muttering that the demand for the potion was high, yet no one decided to buy it on the spot. She seemed lost in thought, so Alan decided to leave her alone for a while. Suddenly, someone approached the shop and he was somewhat interested in the guild's appraisal certificate. An adventurer told Alan that he wanted to buy the purple potion. Alan stuttered and thanked him, relieved that someone had decided to buy it right away. Suddenly, the adventurer asked Alan how he acquired the potion, and he replied that he used various connections. Hearing that, the adventurer asked if there was a possibility of restocking, but Alan didn't make any promises about it. Just then, the adventurer gave Alan his contact information and he introduced himself as Maxwell. He told Alan that if he restocked, he would like the potion to be sold to him. If he brought it to the guild, they would handle the purchase and he wouldn't mind paying whatever price he asked. Alan took the card, stuttering as he said he understood. Alan asked Maxwell if he was sure, though he disclosed he didn't plan to charge exorbitant prices. Maxwell reassured him that it wasn't a problem. Potions themselves were subject to large price fluctuations, and if monsters suddenly increased or conflicts arose, the price could double. However, purple potions were rarely put up for sale, maybe once a month at best. Many adventurers quit because they couldn't heal their injuries. Just then, Alan asked if regenerative treatment was difficult even for healing magic users. He assumed that there weren't many healing magic users to begin with. Maxwell replied that there were some who could do it, but you could count them on one hand. It was impossible for an average adventurer to hire one. That was why Maxwell said he would pay any price. If money could overcome the impossible, it was cheap. With the potion, he could also treat his comrade. Last month, one of them lost a finger and they needed to cut off the affected area again and apply some potion. That was why Maxwell wanted to keep it in stock as much as possible, and he counted on Alan for it. Meanwhile, Alan stuttered as he acknowledged his words. Maxwell then said he was lucky that day. Suddenly, he noticed that the nearby street was overflowing with people. Now that Alan had thought of it, he wondered if something was happening that day. Maxwell then shared that elf slaves were being brought in that day, though he didn't know the details. Hearing that, Alan was intrigued. After selling the potion, Alan and Aina looked around, as they were there for a social study too. Alan followed, though he wondered if it was okay. As Alan looked around, he noticed some slaves waiting to be bought. He didn't know the country had a slave system, which was different from what he had imagined. However, Aina told him it was on a small scale. Alan noticed the paper the slaves were holding, so he asked Aina about it. Aina explained that it was a document listing salary and job conditions, and it also included contract periods and qualifications. Alan was shocked to know that slaves were paid, and they could even choose their jobs. Slavery, but make it corporate. Aina was shocked at his reaction, and she asked what country he was from. She then explained that the people who came to their country weren't those who became slaves due to debt or crime. That was why both parties needed to agree to a contract. The advantage for employers was that they could place secrecy and behavior restriction magic on their slaves. It was like having a servant bound by a contract. However, most of the work was tough unless they had some special skills. Just then, Alan asked if elf slaves were rare and Aina confirmed it. She wouldn't be surprised if one cost 10 million a month. Alan was now lost in thought, thinking about the elves who came to the black market by themselves. And most importantly, why did they? Just then, they came across a huge crowd. Alan said there were a lot of people, while Aina complained about not being able to see what was ahead. Alan turned to Aina, telling her to be careful not to get separated. Meanwhile, Aina freaked out, seeing that he was being swept away by the crowd as he said that. She tried to go after him, but the crowd was stronger than her. After a while, she finally caught up to Alan, but now they were both stuck. They got swept quite far, and they didn't even know where they were. As Alan struggled, he noticed that Aina seemed entranced by the figure before her. When Alan turned to look, he saw a mysterious elf on a podium reading a book as she ignored the large crowd. Alan was dazed, and Aina said that the elf was beautiful. Alan suddenly noticed a framed paper, assuming it was a list of conditions. The elf had no salary preference, contract period, or work content. As Alan read, he was intrigued by the last item on the list. The elf was looking for a buyer with 1 red potion, 3rd grade or higher. As Aina and Alan left the place, the bystanders whispered that the elf's companion was around and they were seriously injured. The elf was traveling around to save them, and it was a touching story. However, they wondered if it was worth a red potion. That was why her conditions were like that, and maybe the elf would make it worth it for the buyer. As Alan listened, he was convinced that the red potion might be worth more. But that wasn't it, and it wasn't about that. Alan thought it wasn't a fair exchange, it was just a sacrifice. At this rate, that child would be in danger. However, Alan might be able to make a red potion. If only he could do it. Just then, Aina checked in on him, noticing that he suddenly stopped. Alan apologized, as he was just thinking. Aina asked if he was concerned about the elf, but Alan frantically denied it. Aina fell silent for a moment. Then she told Alan that if he sympathizes with everyone, he wouldn't last. She advised him to save his compassion for those he could actually help. She asked if he got it, but Alan was too stunned to speak. He then thanked her, admiring her for occasionally saying something good. Aina replied that he said 1 word too many and that she was different. She quickly resumed walking, telling Alan that they should head back. Alan thought that Aina probably meant it differently, but in a way she pushed forward. He could use a tight-lipped employee anyway, especially in repacking and sorting goods. This might just be an opportunity for him. It wasn't like him to want to help, but if there was a possibility, it was worth trying. Later on, Alan returned to Japan, where he visited the old man who once offered him lunch. The man was surprised to see him, while Alan apologized for visiting so suddenly. The old man reassured him it was fine, then he invited Alan inside. Shortly after, the old man brought some tea, telling Alan that it had been a while. He asked if he wanted to stay over for dinner, and he had just harvested some eggplants. Alan brimmed with excitement and asked if it was okay, though he was quickly embarrassed by it. Suddenly, he sat formally, causing the old man to ask why he was doing that. With a serious tone, he told the old man that he had something to ask of him. The old man was puzzled, so he asked again if Alan wanted to borrow some land. Alan confirmed this was what he wanted, but he reassured the old man that it would only be for a month. The old man said he didn't mind, but he only had barren land, and he asked Alan if that was okay. Alan was surprised that he said yes, then told the old man that it was fine. He then expressed his gratitude. The old man told Alan to use the land as he liked, Then he insisted on treating him to a meal. Now, Alan managed to borrow the field, but this was his first time farming, and he wondered if it would go well. Just then, someone called out to Alan. To his surprise, a young man riding a tractor was getting close. Alan was surprised, seeing that a reliable helper had arrived. Alan thanked Kita, the young man, and asked if he had just driven a tractor. Kita explained that he borrowed it from his parents because they were farmers. Even so, he was amazed at the sight of the tall weeds which foreshadowed the work they had to do. Just then, Kita asked Alan what his schedule was like, and he explained that he planned to plant 4,000 rose bushes next week. He was aiming to harvest in a month, but the seedlings were still in the bud stage. This made Alan realize that it might be too difficult after all. However, Kita said no and insisted they could manage, which surprised Alan. Alan asked how he knew, and so Kita pointed to the field and told him to look. The types of weeds were different on either side of the line, and now that Alan mentioned it, Kita noticed that there were no troublesome weeds on the field side. So it was likely it was used until recently. He then grabbed a horsetail plant and some bamboo grass, saying that they actually increase when one plows. There were no absolutes in farming. Just then, Kita and Alan put on their gloves and glasses, thinking that action was better than thinking. After that, they started preparing the field for planting, carefully removing the weeds with their grass cutters. They loaded the weeds onto their truck and kept on working until the place was clean. As the day ended, they happily looked upon their work, convinced that that was it for the day. Alan never thought they would make that much progress in a day, but he had somewhat expected this from a farmer's son. Kita complimented Alan as well, saying that he was walking like a tractor himself. Just then, Alan sulked, wondering if it was okay. Kita asked what he meant, so Alan shared about how he was told that he could do as he liked because the land was barren. However, it seemed like it was used until recently. Just then, Kita told him that Genji, the old man, was actually happy about it. Alan asked if that were really true, and Kita confirmed it, noting that the land was being used for its original purpose. Alan asked what he meant, so Kita explained that Genji was a large landowner, so he had many troubles. At the back of Alan's mind, he had already guessed it was about inheritance issues, which only proved that the world was harsh. Just then, Kita said that they should do their best tomorrow too, for Genji's sake. Alan was surprised that Kita would still be around by the next day, thinking that he was only helping out. With a smile, Kita explained that he took time off from his part-time job. Alan told Kita that he couldn't trouble him like that, and he insisted that he could manage the rest on his own somehow. Kita was surprised, asking if he could truly do that even with all the work that had to be done. Overwhelmed by the long list of tasks, Alan yielded. Alan got that Sigma grind set but forgot the grind part. To make him feel less guilty, Kita reassured him that he could only help out for a few days. Alan felt really sorry, and he told Kita that he would properly thank him for it. He also insisted on covering the diesel and machine costs. Suddenly, Kita asked why Alan was being so formal about it, but he struggled to answer. Kita then told him that he was helping because he wanted to. After all, they were friends. Alan was stunned, unable to believe that he was called someone's friend. Seeing his reaction, Kita asked if it was the first time that Alan had heard that word. Alan quickly snapped out of it and explained that this was the first time that he had made a friend in Japan, which somehow surprised Kita. Alan then said that if they were to be friends, then he wanted to do things properly all the more. Kita sighed, complaining about Alan being overly serious. Just then he got an idea. If that was the case, he had one request. Alan asked what it was, and so Kita invited him for some anime evangelism later. He also had that Koi he mentioned before. Alan thought Kita was a precious peer after all. Yet he couldn't help but wonder if it was beneficial only for him. Days later, Alan had somehow managed to finish planting. In the end, he got help from various people, and he felt bad about it. Just then, Akira approached him saying that if he told her, then she would have prepared everything, including the land. Alan said that providing the roses was more than enough, and he apologized for making such an unreasonable request. It was a personal matter after all. However, Akira reassured him it was nothing at all. He had provided the excess red potions, and so she wouldn't hesitate to offer any support. Alan then received a bottle from Akira, thanking her in the process. However, he told her that everything relied on things going well. Suddenly, Alan told Akira that there was something he wanted to ask her. She asked what it was, and so Alan explained that Saionji had told him to stop reporting about magic roses to the Leaf Research Facility. He asked if she knew the reason for this, but Akira fell silent. Alan panicked, making it clear that he didn't mean to pry. However, Akira told him it was fine, and she knew she had to explain it eventually. First, she talked about the main and branch families of the Saionji house. Alan might be able to guess at this point that the two families didn't get along. Ryugen and the branch family head, Umi, were in a competitive relationship. On the surface, they were close cousins managing the same company. Just then, Akira asked Alan if he remembered the man who was there when he met Ryugen. When Alan said yes, Akira revealed that he was a spy sent from the branch family. After he disappeared, information that could only be known by someone who was there had been leaked out. Basically, it was just a competitive relationship, and they cooperated in managing business. There was not much of a difference in assets or influence between the main and branch families. It was just a matter of being direct or collateral line. However, due to handling various businesses, they had overseen different areas. Ryugen mainly oversaw the automotive industry, real estate, IT industry, and more. Umi mainly oversaw cutting-edge technology industries like genetic research. With that, Alan realized that the Leaf Research Facility was under Umi's jurisdiction. It was the reason why the branch family was currently dominant. Alan had finally understood everything. Personally, Alan owed a debt to the Leaf Research Facility too, which was why he felt a bit conflicted. Akira believed that this incident would intensify the power struggle to gain control over the Otherworld industry. Alan was shocked, and he asked what she had just said. Akira mentioned again that it was about the Otherworld industry, a business that was related to Otherworld materials and magical power. Many companies had already been established. Some plans were on the scale of hundreds of billions. Alan felt worried, and he wondered if it would be okay with him being the sole supplier. He never imagined that such things were happening behind the scenes. Chairman Ryugen and the others were probably shielding him from the power struggle, and yet, he was acting so carefree. Just then, Akira said she was glad. Alan asked what she meant, so Akira clarified that she was talking about the cultivation site for the magic roses. If it were a village community closed off from the outside, it would be easier to control information. Alan felt scared, but Akira reassured him that he shouldn't be worried about the villagers because she was just kidding. Still, Alan was concerned because her eyes weren't laughing. Finally, Alan grasped the truth, which was why he decided to set up a magic rose cultivation base in Japan. When he returned to Asfial, he informed Saionji that he had learned about the demand for potions in the black market. If it went well, they could have a stable, high income. It would take a few months to prepare, and he needed to make sure the elf situation wouldn't get exposed. Just then, he shared that he had heard various things about the Saionji family's situation from Akira. Saionji only acknowledged him, which bothered Alan because she didn't ask more about it. Saionji had no interest, as all she could do was believe in her father from where she was, Saionji hitting him with the skip ad button. Just then, she told Alan to take a look at her potted plant. Alan asked if it was a magic rose, but it wasn't. Saionji had tried it too, but it didn't mutate as expected. Alan guessed that exposing it to magical power wasn't enough. If they could create herbs capable of making purple potions by doing that, they wouldn't be that valuable. So, that meant that the key might be the characteristics of Alan's magical powers. Saionji thought it was strange. Transferred or reincarnated, people usually had the blessing skill and magical aptitude for special attributes. However, she recalled that Alan couldn't use any magic. Alan felt a little awkward, and he said that it was just for now. Saionji thought that it didn't seem to be an extra attribute either, which could possibly make it an unidentified attribute. Or it could be the influence of his blessing skill. Alan didn't know, as it was the first time that he had heard about it too. Just then, he told Saionji that he would report back if he found anything. Even so, Alan just found out that the Moon Gate could transport living plants. This made him wonder what on earth this power was. There was still so much that he didn't understand. Later on, Alan went to the N5 Magic Academy, and as he walked the halls, he thought about how he needed to prepare things other than red potion. However, he wasn't sure if that would work out either. Not long after, a maid greeted him, saying that they had been expecting him and that he should enter. Alan thanked her, and as soon as he entered the room, he thanked someone for coming despite their busy schedule. That person turned out to be Chris, and she wondered what brought Alan to her. Chris was intrigued when Alan told her about the elf slave, as it seemed like something straight out of a light novel. Alan explained that he only wanted a discreet employee, but somehow he couldn't leave them be. At the back of his head, that definitely wasn't his intention. Chris figured it was something like that, but more importantly, she wondered why Alan was in such a place. Alan panicked and tried to think of an answer, but his avoidance only made Chris excited. She wondered what on earth he was even saying with that straight face. Just then she told Alan not to worry, as she wouldn't eat him or anything. Alan stuttered. Then he asked if she really meant that. Suddenly Alan handed a box to Chris, saying that it was a souvenir. She asked if it was truly okay, so Alan reminded her that she was always supporting them in various ways. That day, he brought her cream puffs. Chris thanked him and said that she would always be indebted to him. She then told him that she would enjoy it with her family later. She suddenly froze the entire box, shocking Alan. He asked if he had just witnessed ice magic, and Chris confirmed it. Of course, it could be used for attacks, but it was also useful for ice rooms, which made it a convenient magic. It was like killing two birds with one stone. As she explained all of this, Alan couldn't help but think that it was cool. Just then, Chris revealed that what she just did wasn't magic, prompting Alan to ask what she meant. Chris explained that she just slightly loosened the magical power she usually suppressed. Just then, she demonstrated what she meant. She made her tea freeze, and she didn't even have to move for it. The downside was that it would happen if she let her guard down. She sighed, thinking it was convenient and inconvenient at the same time. That's low-key a threat. Meanwhile, Alan kept silent, obviously stunned by the revelation. He knew it, but Chris's magical power really was incredible. Even his tea was a bit frozen too. Just then, Chris realized that they got off track. She then recalled that Alan had a request for her regarding the elf slave. With that, Alan said that he wanted to prepare a house in the royal capital. Chris was confused, and she wondered if the elf couldn't just stay in the brigade team's house. Alan said it wouldn't work, as it seemed like the elf had companions too. He then asked Chris if there were countries where slavery was prohibited, and she said yes. Alan thought that if the brigade ended up working abroad, it could be a problem if it was discovered they owned slaves. That was why he wanted to keep it a secret from everyone in the brigade, because he didn't want to cause them trouble. Also, his head might roll at the possibility of him being cancelled for having an elf as a slave. Chris understood, and in that case, she would find a safe place. However, it might involve some risks in the future. Alan seemed confused, so Chris explained that she was talking about the people who couldn't afford red potions and couldn't buy slaves. If they found out where the slaves were, they might try to steal them. However, if they applied strong anti-theft magic, it shouldn't be a problem. Chris warned that it would be a bit expensive, but Alan still wanted to do it. He really wanted to pay for the house himself, but it might cause strange misunderstandings. Chris was a bit confused about the paying part, but she was suddenly cut off when Alan told her that he had one more thing to discuss. He needed a different identity, as it was the only way to keep it hidden from the public and the brigade. Chris finally understood that this was why Alan came to her. It was too difficult after all. She then asked who Alan thought she was. In this country, royalty was above the law. Nothing was impossible. So she's just the medieval Jeff Bezos? Alan asked if she was sure it was okay, and Chris confirmed it. She owed Alan a favor, and it was also to make up for their first meeting. With that, Chris promised to issue a family register along with a merchant guild card. She told Alan to use them when necessary, and he thanked her for it. Alan then apologized for taking up her time that day, but Chris didn't mind. If anything, she was glad that she could be of assistance. This made Alan smile, and he vowed to repay this favor. After that, Alan took his leave, which finally allowed Chris to breathe. She demonstrated her praying hands, fantasizing about Alan's smile. Later on, Alan returned to Japan, thinking that the crucial part was about to start. He was approaching a restricted zone, and he panicked when he saw the surveillance camera staring directly at him. From afar, a man was looking at him through his binoculars. Alan thought it seemed pretty intense, but Akira reassured him it was just security. He asked if it wasn't a bit excessive, but Akira said no and insisted it was necessary. As she mentioned before, they couldn't let this matter leak to the outside. This garden got more defense than the president. However, it was only a matter of time before the existence of the other world would become public knowledge. This was also for Alan's safety, and she asked him to understand. Alan said he was fine, but he was concerned about the villagers being scared. However, Akira said this wasn't an issue. They had told everyone that Alan had a special cultivation technique and that entry was restricted due to new variety development with the Saionji group. They were surprised, but they understood. Alan understood, and technically it wasn't a lie. He did plan to explain it to them again himself. The roses were growing well, and they should be ready for harvest in a week. After that, it would depend on the magical power. They were infusing magical power twice as often and for longer than before, so Alan thought it would be fine. Just then, Akira asked if she could observe him infusing the magical power, and he said yes, as he was just about to do it. Suddenly, Alan closed his eyes and opened his palms wide, directing them at the field of roses. Just then, the roses glowed, fascinating Akira. Alan said she was right, and he didn't understand the logic behind it either. However, they had started emitting light recently. He also wondered if they could analyze one of the roses to observe magical power. Akira said it wasn't her field of expertise, so she wasn't sure. However, the researchers there might. True enough, a group of researchers took the samples that they needed, and they were in awe of what they were seeing. Akira felt a little embarrassed to say that these were actually the pride of the Saionji group's research team. However, they hadn't said anything yet. Just then, Akira told Alan to leave the cultivation management to them. She would also come for the harvest. Alan thanked her, and he said he was counting on her. After that, Alan returned to Asfial. There, a brigade member approached him, and she expressed her relief at finding him. She then handed him a letter that was addressed to him. Alan was surprised to receive the letter, and he asked who it was from. The girl said it was from a real estate agent, which reminded Alan that it was about the house. It was way faster than he had expected. This made the girl ask about it, and so Alan explained that he was planning to move soon, which was why he decided to buy a house. The girl was shocked, as it all seemed too sudden. She asked if something had happened, but Alan said that there was nothing too significant. He knew they were getting new members soon, so he thought it was a good opportunity. Just then, the girl was in awe when she realized that Alan had earned that much money. Alan tried to play along, reminding her that he had very rich clients like the princess and the marquise's heir. The girl got stressed out, thinking that this was a world she couldn't even imagine. Alan could only laugh awkwardly at her statement. Just then, the girl asked if he had properly reported this to the commander, but Alan said no, as he planned to tell her after he buys that house. After all, the lot was still undecided. Then, without warning, Alan dashed to the door, saying he was off to view the property. The girl tried to stop him, but he was gone in an instant. This made her wonder what this was all about. Later on, Alan headed to the property, where Chris's maid welcomed him. To his delight, a simple yet spacious house greeted him. He was so overjoyed that he called it his dream home. The maid told him to come in, and she informed him that there were 7 rooms besides the living room, including a study. The sunlight and ventilation were also excellent. As expected of a house bought by the princess, everything looked brand new. Just then, Alan's eyes landed on the bath. He asked if it was what he thought it was, and the maid confirmed it. She then told him how to use it. If he infused magic into a stone attached to the pipes, water would easily flow. And with this stone, he could heat the water. Hearing that, Alan mentally thanked Chris. Alan thought that this area was quite advanced. He then headed to the toilet, but he soon realized that he had gotten his hopes too high. Toilet must have looked at him like, "Bold of you to assume I flush." Suddenly, the maid called out to Alan, mentioning that there was nothing in the storage spaces and that she had checked them all. Alan quickly apologized, as he was just curious about the storage capacity. He felt embarrassed because he acted like he was at the inn. Just then, the maid asked for his thoughts after seeing everything. Alan said he had no complaints, and he suggested proceeding with the contract as is. The maid agreed, and she went to prepare the documents. As Alan waited, he decided to explore the area. When he got outside, he sat by the front porch. He started to worry when he realized that he hadn't even made the red potion yet, but he had already come that far. If he failed, he would be living alone in that house. If only you didn't bury the first one in the Paleolithic era. However, there was no point in thinking about that now. All that was left was to wait for next week. Still, he wondered what kind of person that child was trying to save. Days later, Chris handed the guild card she promised to Alan. Alan thanked her and said that it was a big help, but he was caught off guard by the name written on the card. Kuramusu Hakuba Issei, a merchant. He asked what it was, so Chris explained that it was a new identity, and she thought using Whitehorse Kyun's name was nice. Sis really treating this like Build-A-Bear, but for identities. Alan was the one who asked for it, so he believed it was fine. However, he was quite confused by the Kuramusu in his new name. Suddenly, Chris cleared her throat and said that there were several things she needed to explain. She wanted to go through them in order. First, she asked Alan if he knew that guild cards had ranks. He said yes, and he recalled that both adventurers and merchants had the same 5 ranks. From lowest to highest, the ranks were iron, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. For adventurers, it was based on defeating powerful monsters or conquering unexplored dungeons. For merchants, it was based on the size of their company and the amount of taxes paid to the guild and the country. Just then, Alan said that he had never seen a red-purple card like his in the guild. Chris explained that it was only natural because the guild only had the authority to appoint up to the platinum rank. Alan asked what she meant, and so Chris revealed that there was one more special rank in existence, something that piqued Alan's interest. It was Kuramusu, the highest rank, named after the rarest ore in the world. It was the only one that required royal approval. Usually it was given to large trading companies that had made great contributions to the kingdom. She then mentioned that this Kuramusu rank was the same as what the presidents of Marcus Trading Company and Zoa Peddlers Association had. Alan was shocked, realizing that those were the 2 biggest trading companies in the country. This made Alan question what on earth happened to result in something like that. Chris felt a little awkward, but she began to explain. A few days prior, she talked to her uncle, Romanus Fey Kynres III, the king of the Kynres Kingdom. She informed him that she had acquired some special connections, and she really wanted him to try them. Romanus was curious, and he was surprised when Chris presented him with one of Alan's delicacies. He asked what it was, and so Chris explained that they were foreign sweets called cream puffs. Romanus said that they looked like stones, but they were surprisingly light. He gave it a bite, and he was instantly hooked by the light and fragrant pastry. It had a smooth, sweet filling, a completely new sensation. Chris asked if he liked them, and Romanus said yes, but he wondered where she got such things. Chris revealed that it was from a merchant she had recently taken on. She then mentioned that she had a request regarding the matter. Romanus told her to speak, so Chris said that she wanted to give this merchant a new family register and a certain level of status. He dealt in rare items like the cream puffs, but his operation wasn't very large. The king understood, and he made sense of what the interaction was about. Of course, one would like to protect a confectioner capable of making such delicacies. If a merchant lacked power, their family might be taken hostage, or someone might try to forcibly steal away their artisans. Romanus Deadass created a witness protection program for desserts. Chris was about to say something, but Romanus unexpectedly said that Kuramusu should be fine. She buffered for a while, and she was shocked right after. The king's advisor told him that if he decided so easily, there might be opposition from others. However, Romanus only mentioned that the advisor would give the confection to his wife and daughters later. It would be good to confirm with them then, and he doubted anyone would object. It was just a confection, and yet it wasn't just a confection. Rather than letting Alan go to another country, it was better to treat him well. Besides, even if he didn't want to, the day would come when he would have to step into the limelight. That cream puff had that much power. Chris concluded her story of how everything happened. Alan was stunned, and he couldn't help but say that it had turned into something outrageous. Chris stuttered as she explained the bright side of things. With this, acquiring land would be easier, and Alan could borrow unlimited funds from the guild without collateral. Alan suspiciously asked what was up with her tone. Then he agreed she was right, but was still worried. That moment when you wanted an internship, but they hand you the nuclear codes. Chris defeatedly admitted that she really only intended for it to be silver rank or so. Noticing her regret, Alan told her that, in a way, the situation might be good. Given what he would be trading, something that flashy was easy to understand. He then thanked Chris, not just for the house, but also for helping him out. He also reassured her not to worry about it. He was aware that he had asked for too much, so to compensate, he told Chris to only say the word if there was anything she wanted him to procure. Chris was going to reject the offer, but she stopped when she realized Alan said anything. Worried, Alan nervously said it was limited only to what he could procure. Chris planned on asking him again when things settled down, then she smiled at him. Alan awkwardly agreed, but he wondered what it was all about. Just then, Chris remembered that she had something she wanted to give him. She thought if he was going to use a false name, then he might need a disguise too. She wasn't sure if it would fit, but she gave it to him anyway. Alan thanked her, but she didn't have to go that far. To his surprise, Chris had gifted him some sparkly and lavish clothing. Something fitting for someone named Kazuhoshi Hakuba. That wasn't a disguise, that was a drag debut. He tried it on for a bit, but he quickly excused himself to leave. However, Chris desperately pleaded with him to try on the tip of the sleeve, which he had no choice but to comply with. After that, Alan returned to Japan to tend to the roses. He apologized to Akira for having her help with the harvest, but she insisted it was fine. She also added that the researchers present that day had volunteered to come themselves. Alan was reassured, thinking that if that were the case, then it would be fine. Just then, Akira told him that if all went well, they might be able to harvest once more before the year ended. However, pruning might be necessary. Alan said they needed to discuss future plans with Genji, but Akira cut him off before he could finish. They were already proceeding with negotiations to purchase the land. She assumed that Alan planned to continue making potions in the future, even if they weren't the red ones. Alan stuttered and thanked Akira, but he was scared at how well prepared she was. After that, he said that they had to hurry, because they might not finish harvesting by noon. Akira said it wouldn't be necessary, then she gazed behind them to show something. To Alan's surprise, they weren't just finished with harvesting, but with loading as well. He didn't even notice when they finished all that. Bro blinked once, and the crops got Thanos snapped into storage. One of the researchers was hyped up, saying that everything was ready. He then urged Alan to hurry and transport them to the research facility. Alan only stood there, surprised by the researchers' incredible enthusiasm. Akira initiated moving, then she apologized to Alan about their researchers. Later that day, the roses were transported to the Leaf Research Facility. There they were loaded into giant chambers, extracted, and then experimented on. As Alan had expected of the professionals, they were like completely different people from earlier. As the beaker was filled with the rose's extracts, Akira was shocked, realizing that it was a red potion. Alan thought it probably was, and he hoped it would turn out well. However, it was still hard to believe that a medicine that could regenerate the brain and heart existed. Alan fell silent for a while until Akira called out to him. She suddenly apologized, as she actually didn't understand it herself. Alan shared that there were such legends, but when he searched for documents, he only found vague information. First grade was said to resurrect the dead and grant immortality, but there was no actual evidence or records of its existence. It was the same for second and third grades. It seemed that they were excavated once every few years in the past, but most were monopolized by those in power. Akira understood. Then she recalled that it also had rejuvenating effects. In other words, there were hardly any cases of it being used for medical purposes. To begin with, It wouldn't be in time if the brain or heart were damaged. There were also records of people living up to 150 years old, so at least the rejuvenation effects seemed to be real. Just then, Akira asked if purple potions could regenerate limbs. She wouldn't be surprised if the legends were true. Alan said it was true, but the effects of the red potion itself were uncertain, and there was no guarantee that it could heal. Because of that, he was worried about giving false hope. Akira was silent for a bit, then she told Alan that she didn't think that way. The other party must understand that too. Still, it was much better than having no hope at all. Alan thought she might be right, yet he still wondered if Akira felt something similar when Saionji disappeared. Just then, Akira said that if they could at least research its effects, they could offer some consolation. Alan apologized for the tight schedule, but still, they produced more than he expected. They were supposed to make just over 1 bottle, but the beaker was brimming full. Akira was just as surprised, as it seemed more like 2 bottles than 1. Alan was shocked because they used to only make a few drops in one night, but now they had that much in an hour. Truly, scientific technology was convenient. Even the color was beautiful, and it was so smooth. Akira then said that any scientifically advanced technology was indistinguishable from magic. To the people over at Asfial, their world's science might seem like magic. Alan agreed, noting that at this level, it did seem like magic. Later on, Alan disguised himself as he entered the black market. As expected of the place, it was bustling even on the last day. It seemed even elves weren't selling due to restrictions. He also heard that there were trading companies that prepared multiple third-grade purple potions, but they were still turned down. It seemed that red potions were absolutely necessary after all. Just then, Alan stopped before a huge tent, the slave market. There, a young man welcomed him, asking how he could help. Alan simply said he was there to purchase an elf slave. To confirm, the young man asked if he had read the terms and conditions, and Alan said yes. As he had expected, they were quite cautious. The young man apologized for his rudeness. Then he asked to see Alan's guild card. The young man stuttered as he saw Alan's card. Then he burst into his quarters, telling him to wait a moment. Bro acted like he accidentally unlocked a secret boss. Alan was stunned, realizing that the card was truly an incredible thing. Then, to his surprise, a different man appeared. The man thanked Alan for his patience, then said he would personally handle the matter. The man directed Alan to the lounge area, and there he thanked him for his business. However, he apologized because he was not familiar with the Kuramusu rank merchant by Alan's name. He asked if he had been promoted, and Alan replied that it was quite recent. Alan explained that he had royal clients, so it was related to that. The man finally made sense of things, and now he understood why Alan wanted to purchase an elf. He then asked Alan if he had a red potion with him, and he confirmed it. When Alan showcased the red potion, the man was stunned into silence. In all his years of business, that was the first time that he had seen one in person. He then politely asked Alan if he didn't mind. He would like to appraise it. He asked if it was all right, and Alan said it was fine. While he did that, he gave Alan a brief explanation. The elf slave's name was Yorua, and her abilities included reading, writing, and basic calculations. She could also use magic and handle a bow. She had extensive knowledge of plants, and she could work as a servant, adventurer, or even a researcher. Alan had read from somewhere that elves were knowledgeable about plants, so it must be true. She might be able to help with cultivating magic roses in the future. Just then, the man revealed that most people who purchased female slaves had one thing in mind. Yorua was 18, unmarried, and still a virgin. As an elf, she was of the highest value. Yorua out here being treated like limited edition Pokemon merch. Just then, Alan said he was hoping for a Type 3 labor contract, which surprised the man. The man then asked Alan if he was even familiar with the going rates for slaves, but he admitted that he didn't know in great detail. The man then explained that elf slaves were usually about 5 times the price of normal slaves. A Type 3 contract would cost over 1 million gold per month. The most expensive contracts for wives or mistresses cost several million, but even that didn't compare to the value of a red potion. Alan understood. It would take time, but he could make more potions. Just then, Alan asked the man, Mr. Bank, if he was sure about it. He was a merchant after all. Mr. Bank replied that it was true that selling goods was important, but he valued trust just as much. Just then, a woman informed Mr. Bank that the appraisal of the potion had been completed. He asked how it went, and the woman revealed that the result was a red potion, grade 3, meaning it was genuine. Mr. Bank was almost certain from its overwhelming aura, but he could not think that Alan actually possessed a red potion. Alan was relieved to know that it worked because he was starting to worry about what to do if it failed. With that, Mr. Bank went to call Yorua, and he told Alan to wait a moment. Shortly after, Yorua entered the room. She was silent, but then she asked Alan for his name. Alan didn't respond, and they just stood there in silence. Mr. Bank broke the awkward atmosphere, and he suggested going over the contract details. He had been arranging it on Yorua's behalf at various slave markets, and the fees had already been paid. so there was nothing for him. Also, Yorua didn't have any debts, so Alan didn't have to pay anything additional. Yorua made the transfer of a red potion a mandatory condition, which Alan had already agreed to, and the appraisal was complete. Just then, Yorua spoke, unable to believe that a red potion had actually been found. The man informed Yorua that Alan wished for a Type 3 labor contract. Considering the transfer of the red potion, 350,000 gold per month would be appropriate. Yorua had no objections, and she claimed she didn't even need to be paid. If Alan was really giving her the red potion, she would be willing to devote her entire being to him. Hearing that, Mr. Bank fell silent at her words. Alan understood how Yorua felt, but he couldn't help but wonder what would happen to the person she was with if she didn't earn money. Mr. Bank then explained to Alan that the person he was referring to was the one Yorua was trying to use the red potion on. Her name was Arya Feinkins, one of the rarest races in this world, a high elf girl. Alan was unfamiliar with it, and Mr. Bank understood that he didn't know about them, given how few they were. They were like royalty, possessing vast magical power and an aptitude for special magic. Alan asked Yorua what kind of relationship she had with Arya, and she replied that elves like her served the high elves, and she served Lady Arya. Just then, Mr. Bank said that Arya was severely injured in a battle with monsters, and she had been unconscious for over a year now. Alan couldn't believe that it had been that long. Sis took a nap longer than my last situationship. Mr. Bank continued, saying that Lady Arya had been a subject of controversy due to her unique background. There were rumors that her injury was orchestrated by purist elves. Alan was intrigued by Arya's unique background, and so Yorua revealed that it was called atavism. Normally, high elves were only born between high elves. Some wanted to welcome Lady Arya as royalty, fearing the curse of overly concentrated bloodlines. Others, the purists, wanted to eliminate her to protect the bloodline. The elves were divided, and it was possible that purist elves might attack in the future. After that, Mr. Bank informed Alan that there was less danger if they lived quietly in the royal capital. The forest of Gaja, where the elves lived, was 2 countries away from where they were. He should be fine as long as he didn't go there. Alan understood, and he said he would keep that in mind. Even so, it was unexpected in many ways, but he couldn't help but wonder if Yorua telling him before the contract was part of her personality. Truly, high elves were future problems. In any case, Alan decided to deal with it after Arya healed right. That night, Alan went to see Arya. She didn't look like she had been sleeping for a year at all. On top of that, he felt a sensation that was similar to Chris's, and it had such immense magical power. Yorua explained that even so, Arya's magical power was less than half of what it should be. She had been barely surviving while constantly consuming magic. Alan was shocked, as this was merely less than half. Arya probably didn't match up to Chris, but it might be several times more than Saionji. Just then, Mr. Bank asked Alan if he was truly sure about it. Alan confirmed his wishes and told them to proceed. With that, a doctor prepared the red potion and slowly made Arya consume it. A few hours passed, and they saw no major changes. She was still unconscious, and they couldn't help but wonder if it wasn't working. Mr. Bank and Alan started to lose hope, especially Yorua, who had been calling for Arya's name. As the clock continued to tick, Yorua held Arya's hand, weeping in despair. Then to her shock, Arya's hand suddenly twitched. Arya slowly opened her eyes and muttered Yorua's name. Yorua was speechless, tears welling in her eyes. She finally broke down in tears, relieved that Arya woke up. Everyone in the room couldn't believe it. Yorua kept on crying while Alan stood there smiling in relief. Just then, he headed for the door, prompting Mr. Bank to ask where he was going. Alan replied that he would come back another day, as he didn't want to intrude when they were having a moment. He told Mr. Bank that he was heading off, but as he approached the door, he was greeted by a bunch of people who were curious about Arya's state. A woman who was in the room with Alan informed the others that Arya had woken up safely. They were shocked, and they knew they had to tell everyone. Mr. Bank told Alan that the woman usually maintained a composed demeanor, but despite appearances, she was quite sociable. Alan thought that it seemed so, and he could tell from the reaction. Just then, another woman approached Alan asking if he was the one who bought Yorua. When Alan confirmed she was right, the woman was relieved as she wanted to give thanks. She started to tear up as she shared that Yorua was about the same age as her child, so she couldn't help but think of her as a daughter. Alan was a bit surprised to hear that, and he wondered how old the woman was. Just then, he felt a sudden wave of sadness. Yorua was going to become a slave now, but of course he didn't intend to treat her badly. She probably wouldn't be able to return home for a while. Just then, the woman chuckled, making Alan ask what the matter was. The woman then revealed that she used to be a slave too, confusing Alan. She went on to explain that different countries and cultures weren't as big a deal as others might think. Her husband was her former master when she was a slave. Not her dropping trauma lore like it's a fun fact. She smiled as she said that there might be wonderful encounters along with the hardships. Alan asked if that was true, and the woman confirmed it. Although the woman was human and Yorua was an elf, she was sure that with Yorua's strong spirit she would manage from there on out. Later that day, Alan thought about preparing the house before those two arrived. Just then, he stumbled into Sayonji. She said it was a coincidence and mentioned that Alan had recently bought a house. Alan was overwhelmed with anxiety, and he frantically explained that it wasn't new and was merely a single story. He couldn't help but wonder if she found out. Just then, Sayonji asked if he had paid it in full, and Alan replied that he had the means. He was suddenly relieved, as it didn't seem like she actually knew. Just then, Sayonji asked if the furniture was from the other world, and Alan said yes, adding that he didn't have any particular attachment to things from this world. Suddenly, Sayonji said she had something to ask. She wondered if it was all right for him, as she wanted to come over and visit his house. Alan was stunned and confused. Sayonji apologized to Alan, as lately she hadn't been able to find a place to relax. Alan was understanding, knowing that Sayonji had been cooped up in the team house. However, he still wondered why she chose his place. Finally, they arrived at his house. As they entered, Alan apologized for not having much, but he told her to make herself comfortable. Sayonji thanked him, but she still felt sorry for the intrusion. Just then, Alan entered his room and told Sayonji to take her time, which confused her. Bro acting like an Airbnb host, avoiding eye contact. She asked where he was going, and she reminded him he was the host. She thought it would be troublesome if he weren't there, and she wanted him to show her around too. Left with no choice, Alan returned because Sayonji was okay with it. After that, Alan showed the living room to Sayonji. She noticed that there really was nothing there, and Alan confirmed the obvious truth. Suddenly, Sayonji told Alan that she had one more thing to ask. She wondered if he could open the moon gate there and connect it to her home in Tokyo. And so, Alan opened the moon gate in his house, and he took out some furniture from it. Amazon Prime, but make it interdimensional. He was surprised, so Sayonji explained to him that Akira was taking care of it from the other side. Alan asked what it was all about, but Sayonji insisted on explaining it later. For now, she wanted him to take out the table. After that, Sayonji relaxed and sipped some tea. As she had expected, Akira had done good work. Just then, Alan approached her, apologizing for interrupting her while she was relaxing. He was wondering if she could now explain what was going on, and Sayonji finally agreed. Alan thought that Sayonji couldn't take back all the furniture with him, and surely she didn't plan on living there. Sayonji knew, as she wasn't some uninvited wife moving in. Although the furniture weren't brand new, she wanted Alan to consider it as a housewarming gift. Alan couldn't believe that all of it was his, but Sayonji confirmed it. She guaranteed the quality, as they were all custom-made items from trusted brands. She also wanted him to let her know if anything was missing. Alan stuttered as he thanked her, and he wondered how much it all cost. Just then, Alan asked if the coffee maker was included, and Sayonji said it was the plan. He then told Sayonji that he couldn't drink coffee, but this only irritated her because that comment was unnecessary. She handed him a cup of coffee, which he ended up receiving. He decided to take a sip, and he thought about keeping the coffee maker anyway. He was surprised, as the coffee was actually good. Sayonji proved him wrong, and she claimed that taste buds could change with age. In Alan's case, it might be because of his new body. Just then, Sayonji shifted the topic, and she mentioned the elf that was being sold in the royal capital's black market. Without facing Alan, she asked if he had happened to buy her. This conversation swerved harder than Mario Kart. Alan was shocked that she knew, but he kept his composure and asked why she thought that. Sayonji explained that everyone in the royal capital knew that the elf was being sold. Before proceeding, she asked if Alan was following her story, and he said yes. Normally, an elf would be bought immediately, no matter how strict the conditions were. However, that elf didn't sell for a month, and that was because a transfer of a red potion was needed. Sayonji knew that it was an item that even merchants with shops in the royal capital couldn't prepare. First of all, even if they had one, it was questionable whether the value would match up. In the royal capital, there hadn't been any information about red potions being discovered or brought in from outside for the past few years. Of course, there was a possibility that they were transported secretly. If that information were completely blocked, it would likely involve the country. However, Sayonji considered the possibility of it being produced in the royal capital. She had recently heard about a man who successfully cultivated herbs for purple potions, which was said to be impossible. If that were the case, it wouldn't be strange if he succeeded in creating red potions too. Besides, Alan had been consuming magic power to the limit for the past month. At that point, she thought he was up to something behind the scenes. Half the value of red potions lay in how difficult they were to obtain. Just then, Alan mentioned that if he remembered correctly, they were holy relics excavated from high-difficulty dungeons. There used to be a rush to conquer dungeons for those holy relics, but they were probably all taken during the expeditions. This meant that excavations were likely hopeless. Sayonji argued that if someone could prepare such an item on their own, the value of red potions would decrease for that reason. This would reach the point where they might even exchange it for an elf slave. This made Alan speechless, and he finally gave up. He admitted that everything was just as Sayonji said. Sis waterboarded him with facts. He had no choice but to confess to human trafficking. Just then, Saionji made it clear that she was not trying to criticize him. She thought she understood his personality well enough. Rather, she felt inadequate for causing trouble due to her lack of influence. If only she had the power and fame that kept everyone at bay, Alan wouldn't have felt the need to hide what he was doing. At the very least, Alan could have consulted her. Suddenly, Alan anxiously explained that this time, it was completely his personal matter. It was not something for Saionji to worry about. However, Saionji argued that he was also an important member of the brigade, and it was also a commander's duty to protect them. Alan thought for sure that Saionji would be upset about him buying a slave, and he was also surprised that he was considered a member. Just then, Saionji apologized, then she told Alan that she had no other thoughts on the matter. She just wanted him to rely on her if there were any problems, since the other party was female. Alan asked if it were truly all right, and Saionji confirmed it. Days later, Mr. Banks created a contract for Alan and Yorua. Similar glowing symbols appeared on their wrists, and with that, the contract had been completed. Mr. Banks's job ended there as well. Alan then thanked him for everything, but Mr. Banks played it cool and only told the young man to take care of himself. As Mr. Banks left, Alan realized that he didn't have a good image of slave traders, but his impression had changed a bit. Suddenly, Yorua told Alan that she could never repay her debt even if she spent her whole life. But once again, she looked forward to working with him. She called Alan her master, but he insisted on using his first name. He also explained that Hakuba was an alias and she didn't need to be so formal. Just then, Lady Arya chimed in saying that Alan was quite handsome for a human. Yorua nervously told Arya that speaking that way to someone they were indebted to was unbecoming. However, Alan said it was okay, as he preferred for them to speak in a way that would be easy to approach. Just then, he remembered that Arya was elven royalty, so he wondered if he should be the one showing more respect. Although at the back of his mind, he knew he didn't even have a contract with Arya. However, Arya said there was no need for that because her birth was no different from a regular elf's. Even so, Alan thought that her magical power was incredible. This made him wonder what kind of monster could have badly injured her. Needless to say, he wanted to ask her about various things someday. After that, Alan brought the girls to the house that he bought for them. Yorua couldn't grasp that this was the house where they would live, while Arya remarked that it was amazing and splendid. However, before she could run inside, Alan called her, telling her that they shouldn't wear shoes inside. He felt sorry about it, but he asked her to take off her shoes. Having no choice, Arya agreed, though she thought it was a strange custom. After that, Alan allowed Arya to explore the house, Bros cosplaying an Asian mom. Meanwhile, Yorua felt nervous about Arya's behavior, and she apologized to Alan. Later that day, as Yorua was doing the laundry, she noticed a box nearby. She asked Alan what it was, so he explained that it was a portable power source that contained electricity. Curious, she asked what electricity was, and Alan reassured her not to worry because it wasn't dangerous. He then explained that he only learned about it recently himself. Just then, their conversation was interrupted when Arya suddenly yelled Yorua's name. Yorua quickly tended to Arya, only to find that she was merely enjoying the fluffy couch. Yorua was freaked out by Arya's behavior, while Alan was glad that they had both recovered. 10 minutes later, Arya explored every inch of the house. Yorua told her that she didn't have to check every single storage place, thinking it was childish. This ain't childish, this is quality control. However, Arya only reminded her that she was only 15 and couldn't help it. In reality, 15 was considered an adult age in that world. Arya suddenly bolted away, saying that she didn't care and that she still wanted to explore. She argued that this was different, which made Yorua chuckle, as it was a sign that she was healthy. Just then, Alan said that it was about time for them to have dinner. That night, the table was filled with warm and scrumptious food. Alan had prepared various dishes, but there was no consistency in the cuisine. It was a jumble of Japanese and Western cuisine. Still, the girls thought it looked delicious. Yorua felt sorry that Alan had to prepare all that as it was supposed to be her job. However, Alan played it cool and said that they were only leftovers, so she shouldn't worry about it. With that, the three of them finally ate. Just then, Yorua asked what the dish in front of her was. Alan explained that it was called salmon carpaccio, a dish containing raw fish. Yorua was surprised by the concept of raw fish, so Alan shared that it was part of his culture in his homeland. He thought about serving it because they had the chance, but he reassured Yorua that she didn't have to force herself into trying it. Now that he had come to think of it, he remembered that elves were vegetarians. He might just have messed this up. Alan out here inventing Elf's Kitchen. Disappointment edition. However, the girls still tried the dishes, and to their surprise, they found them delicious. Arya remarked that it was a strange sensation, but it was delicious. She then asked what the food in front of her was, and Alan said that it was called rice. And so, for the rest of dinner, Arya and Yorua enjoyed Alan's cooking. Later that night, Arya crashed on the couch saying that she was very full. Alan was glad that she liked it. Then he excused himself to prepare the bath. However, Yorua stopped him and insisted on doing it. Alan said it was okay, and he told Yorua to relax because it was only her first day after all. Yorua was stunned, and so was Arya. Arya thought that they seemed to be bought by a good man, but of course they still didn't know for sure. Yorua was still dazed, but she still agreed with Arya. Not the Stockholm Syndrome speedrun. Just then, she noticed Arya staring at her, so she asked if there was something wrong. Then out of nowhere, Arya pinched Yorua's cheek, shocking her. Arya reminded Yorua that Alan being a good person was just a fortunate outcome. If Yorua had been bought by a bad person, she might have just regretted waking up. Yorua was surprised by what she said, but before she could speak, Arya warned her never to do anything like that again. She wanted Yorua to promise her, but she only smiled and said she would be careful. Arya was relieved, believing that Yorua should answer that immediately. Just then, Alan remembered something and he peeped from the bathroom door, telling the girls that he also had some dessert. He asked the girls if they wanted a bite, so they instinctively smiled at each other and said yes. The next day, Alan woke up early. He stretched his limbs and remarked that it was nice to own a house. Just then, he found a letter in his mailbox. He wasn't expecting anything, but the letter was from Ray Castellano. Yorua told Alan to do his best work, while Arya told him to come back soon. Just then, Alan apologized because they must be bored staying at home all the time. They had to do so until things settled down. However, Arya argued that it was more fun than when she was living in the forest. Besides, she had the important job of reading through all the manga in the study. Alan was relieved, then he bid the girls goodbye. They saw him off and told him to take care and have a good day. With that, Alan finally set off to start his tasks. He had 3 main jobs. The first was his work as a member of the Gyogetsu Brigade, where he was mainly in charge of procurement and accounting. The second was his work as the brigade's merchant. Although he was still a novice iron rank merchant, he worked semi-independently by dealing with sweets and books imported from Japan. The last third job was his work as Hakuba Issei, a Cremus class merchant. He focused on purple potions made from magic roses, and he planned to sell them to adventurers waiting for regenerative treatment. As for his job on that day, Alan was to meet up with Ray. Homies living like he got child support in 3 different dimensions. When he finally arrived to see him, Ray greeted him warmly. Ray mentioned that it had been a while, and Alan thought the same thing. Ray then apologized for troubling Alan when he was busy, but he had something he wanted to discuss with him. And so Ray explained that the academy had shops in each dormitory, and they had multiple trading companies supplying goods. However, the merchant in charge of the Great Eagle dormitory was going to quit. So Ray wanted to recommend Alan as a replacement. Alan stuttered at the thought of it, but Ray seemed sure and asked what he thought about it. Alan was worried because it was a massive school with thousands of students. He didn't think he could handle it. With that in mind, he told Ray that he was flattered by his offer, but his daily necessities might be a bit difficult. He believed he could do his best, but he had his doubts. Just then, Ray said that he was not asking for anything unreasonable. He only wanted Alan to handle entertainment and luxury goods. Alan asked what he meant, so Ray mentioned the trading cards that he bought from Alan before. His brother and subordinates really liked them, and he wanted Alan to supply that kind of merchandise. Alan finally understood, and he said it would be possible for him. Bro went from human trafficker to Pokemon card scalper. Ray was delighted, and he thanked Alan. He then laughed as he shared that his brother Roan was especially obsessed with trading cards. He had been winning every day for new packs, and it had been difficult to moderate. With that, Ray told Alan that he would be counting on him from now on. They then shook hands, settling their agreement. However, at this time, Alan had no idea that the entertainment goods, centered around trading cards, would cause such a commotion throughout the academy. Later that day, Alan went home and silently browsed through a magazine. Arya suddenly popped out of nowhere, asking him what he was doing. Alan lowered the magazine and explained that he was studying a card game called Trading Cards, which piqued Arya's interest. She wanted to know about it too. To show her, Alan pulled out a small set of cards he had with him and handed them over. Her eyes sparkled as she saw the beautiful cards, and she remarked that they were amazing. She asked how she could play, and so Alan took out the magazine and invited Arya to study together. The game, he explained, was about building a deck and battling with it. There were 7 main types of cards, each with its own roles and effects, with rarer ones generally being more powerful. He then moved on to describe character cards, which displayed important information such as race attributes, cost values, attack power, health points, and unique abilities. Afterward, he explained magic cards, which could produce a variety of effects but also required specific costs. The two of them continued to review the material until they had gone over everything written in the magazine. He asked Arya if she understood, though he himself didn't fully get it. Just then, Arya boasted that she understood completely. The more powerful the cards she included, the stronger it would be. She asked Alan if that was what it meant, but this only proved how much she didn't get anything at all. Bro explained an RPG and she hit him with Club Penguin rules. Alan said no, as the magazine said that they had to include them in a balanced way. Arya argued that it couldn't be right, as it was like putting curry on a hamburger, which made it delicious. Suddenly Arya said that she wanted cards too. Alan thought for a while, then he told Arya that if she helped him and Yorua, he might give her 1 pack as a reward. Without hesitating, Arya bolted towards Yorua, asking if there was anything she could help with. Yorua, who was busy gardening, refused to receive help because she was only doing her hobby. Meanwhile, Alan enjoyed his brief moment of peace, casually sipping a cup of tea. Alan had now acquired a decent supply of trading cards. As he looked over the piles of boxes, he realized there was still so much he needed to learn now that he was officially handling it. But for now, he needed to repackage them. Once the initial inventory was done, he would ask Arya and Yorua to help out. Then, as Alan observed the boxes, he realized that the cardboard and plastic needed to be replaced. Later that day, Alan headed to the N5 Magic Academy carrying the trading cards with him. He was easily permitted by the guards to pass through the school's baggage inspection area. He carefully looked around, trying to find the Great Eagle dormitory. Just then, a young man approached him, stating that he had been expecting Alan. He explained that Ray had already spoken to him about this meeting and introduced himself as Meinl of the Great Eagle Dormitory's Student Life Department. Alan responded politely, giving his own introduction, and soon after, Meinl gestured for him to follow as he led the way deeper into the academy grounds. Later on, Meinl brought Alan to the store. From now on, he told Alan to deliver his goods there. Meinl was surprised by everything that Alan brought, as they were items he had never seen before. Alan then told him that everything in the box was snacks. Just then, Meinl noticed a cart filled with boxes, and he asked what was inside them. Alan explained that they were trading cards for a card game, and it was Ray's personal request. He then gave a sample to Meinl, telling him to have one if he liked. Meinl carefully inspected the cards, and he finally understood what Ray had been recommending. Alan had calculated that 1 pack was worth 3,000 yen, and a starter deck was 50,000. That better come with a free resurrection spell. It was probably outrageously expensive by the world standards, so he wondered if it would really become popular. Suddenly, Alan asked Meinl if they had a suggestion box, as he would be happy to hear everyone's requests. However, Meinl fell quiet, so Alan had to ask again. Meinl quickly snapped back to his senses and said that they did have one. Just then, he randomly told Alan that he would be fine, which prompted him to ask what he meant. Meinl explained that instead of taking the time to read suggestions, the previous person in charge simply ignored the student requests. Apparently, he had some powerful nobles backing him up, so they couldn't do anything about it. Previous manager ran the box like it was Gmail spam. It was good that he was fired, but Meinl still seemed upset about it. Alan felt bad for the students, as they must have had a hard time. Just then, Meinl told Alan that he didn't have to listen to every request and that he could do what he could within reason. Alan acknowledged that, and he said he'd keep it in mind. After that, Alan went to the headquarters to tend to his other tasks. He needed to work hard on the brigade's tasks too. Just then, someone called him, telling him that he had a customer. He went outside and called Cannon, asking where the customer was. Cannon said that they were waiting outside, and from the looks of it, they were probably a student from the North District. Alan was curious, and he guessed that it was Sakakibara or Ray. Cannon led Alan outside and gestured toward the child standing before them. Alan asked if he was the one who had called for him. The child in turn asked if he was Alan, and Alan confirmed it. Yet, he had no idea who this child was. Just then, Alan recognized the crest on the child's clothing, which was from the Great Eagle Dormitory. Alan quickly apologized for being rude to a noble, but the child played it cool. He told Alan not to worry about formalities. He then introduced himself as Diero Porceli. Seeing that Alan was still uneasy, Diero reassured him that it was fine because he was not concerned about such things. More importantly, there was something he wanted to ask from Alan. After their discussion, Alan asked if Diero wanted him to sell some cross-world packs. However, he apologized, explaining that he didn't handle personal sales. Diero understood, but Alan still felt sorry because he went all that way. Alan about to create supply and demand just to gatekeep himself. Just then, Diero told him not to worry about it, and he claimed it was his fault for making an unreasonable request. He assumed that the others had already reserved the available stocks. Alan then clarified that Diero was actually the first to visit him directly. It was simply that he didn't have enough to allocate for anyone other than special clients. However, he planned to sell some at the street fair the day after tomorrow. He also intended to set a purchase limit. Diero understood. Then he asked how Alan was going to share the information with the others. Alan simply replied that he planned to answer if he were to be asked, which somehow made Diero feel a bit dejected. Despite his disappointment, he knew that it was the right thing to do. Man's acting like Alan just said, "I'm emotionally unavailable right now." Alan was quick to notice his reaction, so he asked if there was some circumstance he should know about. Diero was caught off guard and he frantically told Alan that it was nothing so serious. It was a trivial reason, but he ended up sharing it anyway. Diero explained earlier that it wasn't like that, but he was originally born into a small baronet family in the countryside. He didn't have the magical power or ability to enter N5, but he did have a rare magical aptitude, so he was admitted 6 months ago. Of course, everyone around him was from the top noble families in the royal capital, and being a transfer student made it even harder to fit in. When he heard rumors about the trading cards, he thought it could be a chance to connect with everyone. With that, he wanted to get stronger quickly and be able to play with everyone. He's basically a peasant who speedran his way into Hogwarts VIP. Diero realized that he had been giving such a selfish reason, so he apologized to Alan for it. Alan understood his story, though he had no idea that the trading cards had already become such a rumor. He felt bad for Diero, but he wanted to sell the cards secretly. He knew for sure that it would be troublesome if things got out of hand. Just then, Alan had a light bulb moment. He asked Diero if he had any cards with him, and he said yes. He had managed to complete a deck, and he even showed his extra cards to Alan. Alan asked if he could take a look, and Diero permitted him. After observing the cards, Alan noticed that Diero had quite a collection of rare ones. However, this was clearly a hamburger curry deck, which somehow puzzled Diero. Alan cleared his throat, then he explained that he had too many strong cards. Diero was surprised to know that, so Alan further explained that high-cost cards couldn't be used until later in the game. He was only making it harder on himself in the early stages. Diero asked what he should do, so Alan explained that it was best to build around a card that would be his ace. If his ace was from the dragon tribe, something like that would do. Matching the tribe of his sub-cards would give him more flexibility. One of the charms of trading card games is that one could win regardless of card rarity if one used a strategy. Alan believed that there were many strategies that Diero could use with his current cards. Everything Alan said was written in the guidebook, though he felt quite sorry for giving him such amateur advice. Diero took one of the cards and fell quiet, so Alan called out to him in concern. Alan quickly apologized and asked if what he said was unnecessary, as he was worried that he might have overstepped. Diero said no, and he explained that it was just eye-opening for him. He smiled, realizing that there was probably no such thing as a useless card. Suddenly, Diero ran to the door, telling Alan that he was going home to study right away. He thanked Alan for his help, then he shut the door after him. Bro left that room like he got a sudden anime power-up. Alan had no time to react, and he could only smile at himself, wondering if that was the right thing to do. To be fair, he didn't expect someone to come ask directly. Realizing the sudden demand for cards, Alan also thought about talking to Akira about increasing their stocks. However, before that, he needed to take care of some business. Later that night, he met up with Chris. She told him that his request involved some risk. Although it wasn't illegal, it was still a prohibited item. She asked Alan if he understood that, and he confirmed it and promised to procure anything. Chris had done a lot for him, and he was prepared for the risks. Chris understood, then she handed a paper to Alan, telling him to procure the listed item. Alan was surprised that she wanted a book, which she had previously mentioned was a prohibited item. This prompted him to ask what kind of book it was, so Chris explained that it was no ordinary book. It was a book drawn with passion and prayer by like-minded individuals. It was BL Erotic Doujinshi. Chris really said national security risk, but it's just boys kissing aggressively. Alan recited the book aloud to make sure he wasn't mistaken, but Chris only stared at him without reacting. Alan yielded, and he agreed to help if it was what she wanted. Chris seemed surprised, and she asked if he was really okay with it. She wondered if he understood what kind of material it was, and Alan replied that he did have a general idea. He knew it was some kind of self-published book, and he didn't really mind at all. People's hobbies and preferences were their own business. As long as Chris enjoyed it privately, he didn't see any problem. Still, he wondered if that was enough as a thank you, as he could get her something more expensive. Chris confirmed that it was more than enough because for her, those were sacred texts for her soul. Still though, Alan was looking like Whitehorse Kyun, and with the heart of an angel, she couldn't help but become a total fan of his. Alan panicked and quickly changed the topic, asking if he simply needed to get the books listed in Asfiel. Chris said yes, then she mentioned that she had another request. Alan asked what it was, so Chris replied that she didn't want him to look at the contents. She was serious about it, so Alan promised that he wouldn't look. After that, Alan went on with his day. As he walked around town, he realized that he had various things to do, but they would have to wait until after tomorrow's market festival. Just then, he noticed something strange. There was a line outside their team house. Aina angrily called out to him, asking him what he had done this time. She shook him for a response, so Alan told her to hold on and explain what she was talking about. She revealed that the line was full of his customers, and they all claimed to be merchants. Bro accidentally summoned a Black Friday sale. Though Alan was confused, he promised to handle it right away. Shortly after, Alan met up with one of the merchants, and he immediately apologized for keeping him waiting. The merchant didn't mind and told him not to worry about it. Just then, Alan asked what brought the merchant to him that day, and the man replied that he was representing a trading company that had operated in the royal capital for 5 generations. They currently deal with numerous noble families. Alan understood, but he wondered what this was about all of a sudden. The merchant continued, telling Alan that he had been asked by their clients to secure cross-world pacts. Alan acted composed, but in the back of his mind he was freaking out because he had no idea the rumors had spread that far. The merchant was prepared to offer 10,000 gold per pack, and he wanted to purchase his entire stock. However, Alan apologized and told the man that they were not accepting such requests at the moment. He wanted to help, but he had his reasons. The merchant refused to yield, and he mentioned that this matter involved multiple noble families. With a fake smile, he asked Alan if he was aware of that. Alan was quick to notice that it was a threat, and he was amused to know that the merchant had quite the personality. However, he did admit that it was very merchant-like of him. Alan would rather not have to use this card, but if that was the way the merchant wanted to play it, then he had no choice. Alan told the merchant that even if he said that, if he were to favor one side in his sales, he might incur the displeasure of the Castellano family. Bet homie didn't see that Uno reverse card coming. The merchant was shaken upon hearing the name, and he instantly regretted what he had done. At the back of Alan's mind, this was like being a fox borrowing a tiger's power. As the man left the office, Alan reassured him that they planned to sell packs at tomorrow's market festival. There would be purchase limits, but they should be able to sell him several. The merchant understood, then excused himself to leave. Alan held up his polite attitude, and he told the merchant that he looked forward to seeing him. Alan kept smiling until the man left, and when the coast was clear, he let out an exasperated sigh. He couldn't help but wonder how many more of those people were waiting. Bro was one fake grin away from turning into the Joker. Later that night, Alan was finally able to come home. Yorua, who was cooking dinner, greeted him calmly, while Lady Arya was rather excited. Alan thanked her for preparing dinner, as it was definitely a big help. However, Yorua thought it wasn't a big deal because it was her job after all. Cleaning, cooking, she could handle everything she could. She told Alan to leave it to her, but he was worried that she was taking on too much. Lady Arya agreed, thinking that if Yorua worked too hard, then there would be less for her to help with. And if there was less for her to help with, she would get less pocket money. Hearing them argue, Alan realized that he should make a chore chart soon. Alan told Yorua that he didn't just hire her for housework, as there was another job that he wanted her to do. Yorua was puzzled at the thought, but before she could even get an explanation, Lady Arya raised her hand to get their attention. She reminded them that dinner must come first because she was already starving. She has priorities, okay? Alan and Yorua agreed that she was right, so they went on to have their meal. Yorua handed Alan a bowl of warm food and he thanked her for it. Alan was amazed that she could even make Odin. All he ever had was the instant kind, and even the previous one he had was instant too. Yorua tried to play it down, saying that she just followed the recipe with the ingredients he provided. Alan didn't wait any longer, and he took a bite of the delicious food. Just then, Lady Arya noticed that he was eating with chopsticks, so she asked what it was, as she had been wondering for a while. Alan explained that they were chopsticks, utensils from his homeland. They were quite convenient once she could get used to them. Lady Arya quickly copied Alan's hand, but she was mindlessly using a fork and spoon to do it. Monkey see, monkey do. Yorua told her that it was bad manners, while Alan was puzzled about what she was trying to do. Yorua found the civilization of Alan's homeland to be quite fascinating. Even magical tools that ran on magical power operated on electricity instead, like coffee makers and refrigerators. Alan was amused, and he explained that appliances were magical tools. Lady Arya remarked that it wasn't just the appliances, as the food was mysterious too. She then held up the konnyaku, calling it a slime that was a processed product made from a tuber. If Alan remembered it correctly, it was originally a poisonous tuber, so they mashed it, boiled it with lime, solidified it, and then ate it. That was what he vaguely recalled. Lady Arya continued to eat, thinking that his food culture was baffling. Alan agreed, realizing that it did seem that way. At the back of Lady Arya's mind, Alan and his civilization didn't seem sane. Thanks to that, she was never bored, and the food was delicious too. Yorua felt the same way, which made Alan glad because they were both enjoying this lifestyle. After dinner, Yorua brought up the job that Alan wanted her to do. Alan explained that he wanted her to help him transfer trading cards into some paper sleeves. After demonstrating it, Yorua agreed to help, and so did Lady Arya. Alan handed a box to Yorua, telling her that he would join them once he finished preparing for tomorrow. Yorua reassured him that he could leave it to them, and Lady Arya agreed with her. With that, Alan went on with his tasks. As he carried some boxes across the room, he noticed that Lady Arya was scribbling something on the cards. He asked what it was, so she explained that she imbued it with anti-theft and anti-clairvoyance magic. Alan was surprised that clairvoyance magic existed in this world. Man thought this was arts and crafts, but Arya turned it into Area 51. Just then, Lady Arya asked if it was necessary, and Alan replied that it was extremely helpful. He thanked her as he hadn't considered that possibility at all. He had been reincarnated for 20 years now, but he still had no connection to magic. He guessed his Japanese sensibilities were still strong, and it was probably because his previous life was still longer. Just then, Alan asked Lady Arya about what other methods someone could use to cheat. Lady Arya pondered the thought, then she answered that one possibility might be wish upon a star. Alan asked what kind of magic that was, and Yorua explained that it could manipulate the target's causality to bring good fortune in exchange for enormous amounts of magical power and life force. However, it was originally a grand magic created by elves. Naturally, humans couldn't withstand it. Those who stole this magic apparently sacrificed beastmen and slaves. Alan felt uneasy, realizing that a terrifying magic existed. Hearing that, Yorua reassured him that it was an ancient magic that had been lost to time, and she didn't think there was any need to worry. Lady Arya also doubted that anyone would go that far just for some cards. Imagine committing war crimes just to win Uno. More importantly, they needed to continue with their task. Yorua thought she was right, realizing that they should finish quickly so Alan could rest. As the girls fussed with the cards, Alan was relieved that he didn't have to worry about cheating. Still, he should study more about magic. Finally, it was time for the Royal Capital's Market Festival, where Alan had planned to set up a stall in the North District. The atmosphere there was quite different from the West District. It felt a bit like a school festival, probably because there were more students than faculty around. He thought that the procedures were troublesome, especially the double screening for both the guild and North administration. Still, Alan was determined to do his best that day. Just then, someone approached his stall, asking if he was Alan. When Alan confirmed it, the man informed him that he was a messenger from the Ari Trading Company. If Alan recalled correctly, they were the official merchants for the N5 Academy students. He then told the man that if he was looking for trading cards, he planned to sell them. However, there would be purchase limits. Despite the conditions, the man thought this wouldn't be a problem. As far as the Ari Trading Company was concerned, it was enough if they could meet their clients' requests. With that, the man left, which drew Alan's attention to the long line before him. It looked like he might get quite a few people coming by at this rate, and although he had already expected it, he still couldn't believe that there was already an insane number of people. There were even more than yesterday. He wanted customers, not a population census. One civilian wondered what was with the massive crowd, and another replied that he had no idea. Most of them were from N5, and they wondered why they would come to the festival. Seeing the foul looks of his fellow merchants, Alan started to wonder if he had committed a mistake. Suddenly, someone called out to Alan, addressing him as young punk. It was a fellow merchant mentioning that he hadn't seen Alan's face before. He asked if it was his first time setting up shop in the North District, and Alan confirmed it. He shared that he represented the Alan Trading Company, but the merchant had never heard of him. This somehow explained why Alan wasn't familiar to him. He then went on to say that each trading company in the North District had its own territory. Alan boldly violated that, so he sincerely apologized. Alan seemed puzzled by the concept of a territory, so the merchant explained that Area 3 was a territory for companies that supplied goods to Svol and Leosar. However, Alan's customers were from N5, which meant that he should have been in Area 15. Alan finally understood, and he was very sorry for it. He admitted that he didn't do enough research, and the man stated that he obviously didn't. However, it was just an unwritten rule and not something he would learn from studying. Still, what was done, so Alan was advised to just accept it. Alan just wanted to sell cards, not join merchant mafia. The merchant asked if Alan was listening, and he confirmed it. He then thanked the merchant for letting him know, and he promised to be more careful in the future. The merchant simply grunted, and he spoke to Alan no more. Still, Alan thought that the merchant was quite a nice person. Later on, Alan started to sell some trading cards. He asked one customer to show his guild card, and upon inspection, he informed the customer that he had set a limit of 1 box per trading company. Hearing that, the customer agreed to buy 1 box. He was quite relieved, as it looked like he wouldn't get scolded. By the looks of it, Alan had already guessed that the customer had it tough too. This man definitely has a customer who shouts for fun. Just then, the customer asked to purchase rulebooks and playmates if they were available. However, Alan apologized to the man because he was only selling packs this time. With that, the customer left with his purchased item. At that moment, Alan realized that quite a few customers knew about the card accessories. He guessed that it meant they were spreading. As time passed, Alan realized that it was already noon. The customer flow had settled down a bit, so he decided to take a short break. Still, the cards were selling better than he imagined. He thought he had prepared plenty, but at this rate, they would probably last an hour. As Alan took a bite of his well-earned snack, someone approached him from behind. Alan was surprised, so the man apologized for interrupting his break. "Let the man eat, sir," This isn't a meet and greet. Alan promptly asked what he could do for him, and the man answered that he was curious about what his products were used for. Alan held up one card, explaining that it was a battle-type game that used illustrated cards called trading cards. The man asked if it was like the games played in gambling halls, but Alan said that it was more complex. One could create their own deck by selecting and discarding cards so that it could allow for deep strategic mind games. The man understood, but then he had another question. He was sorry to bother Alan, but he was just curious because so many people from N5 were buying them. Alan reassured him that he wasn't a bother, and if anything, he was grateful for his interest. Seeing how people were eagerly buying the cards, the man guessed that it was quite an entertaining game. Shortly after, Alan returned home. Yorua welcomed him, and so did Lady Arya. Alan shared that his day was quite quick, but he was glad somehow. In the end, everything was sold out in 3 hours. It was good that people besides those from N5 showed their interest too. Suddenly, Yorua approached him, handing him a letter that had just arrived. Alan thanked her and received the letter, but he wondered if it really was one because of how thick it was. Lady Arya asked who it was from, and Alan replied that it was the person in charge at the school where he had supplied products recently. In the letter, Alan was informed that he had been sent some sales reports and request forms from students. The trading cards sold out immediately, and about 90% of the requests were related to them. They would appreciate it if Alan could increase the quantity for the next delivery. Congrats, King, you're Walmart now. This letter was sent by Meinl from the Eagle Dormitory's Life Department. As Lady Arya had expected, business was booming and it was wonderful. Yorua was just as glad and she congratulated Alan. Meanwhile, Alan realized that he would have time for rest in a while.